And we are live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream. Thank you for joining me, one and all, wherever you are in the world, morning, noon, or night. Just waiting for a few people to come in the building. It's always a bit of a delay between the live starting and then people sort of rolling in, but also just the system catches up. Okay, so we've got a few people in the building here. Big Dan and Unrivaled Boxing Talk and News, MMA champ, the GOAT, DHP. Hello, one and all. Good morning. For me, it's morning at least. It may be evening wherever you are, or afternoon. So thank you for for turning up to another Boxing Squared live stream. Just got to get my thoughts together here. So yeah, it's been a few days since I've done a video. I do thank you for the people who reached out to ask, was something wrong? No, nothing was wrong. It was just a case of busy with work, hard to have the energy at night sort of thing. So getting home, feeling shattered, just a big workload. So it is the weekend now, so I'm intending to play a little catch up, do a few videos and all that sort of stuff. There's been a little bit going on, but it's one of these lulls in the heavyweight division where there hasn't been necessarily too much happening. There's not big fights this weekend sort of thing, but we are coming into a period from next weekend where there is going to be big fights galore pretty much for most of the rest of the year. So this little sort of hiatus that we've been on is going to be ending, but there has been some interesting stuff happening in the past week, in the 5 days that since I've done a video, but I will touch on some of that sort of stuff. But just while I'm just setting up the stream, I'm just gonna go to my, because one of the things that I've noticed is with the live streams, because previously I'd had pretty nondescript, what I would say is thumbnails. So before I do a live stream now, I actually make the thumbnail, then go live, and then I insert the thumbnail, because what I've noticed is, and this was just, testing all that sort of stuff, about double the views come when you have a thumbnail with a whole bunch of people in it. So, I mean, I guess that's not shocking in itself, but it really does show that that stuff does matter. But I'm just sort of buying time while I upload the thumbnail so it is there. But yeah, just bear with me for a second. But quite a bit on my list to cover from the past week. I actually did, in the days that I didn't do a video, I actually tried to record a video on Wednesday night my time, but literally I tried for about half an hour, couldn't get past the first 2 minutes. I was just smashed. So for the people that were concerned about maybe something was wrong or had gone on holiday or whatever they thought may have happened for my absence, it was literally just very busy with work. So getting home, little energy, and then a situation that just couldn't really sort of get around to doing a video. But I am here for this live, and what I am intending to do in the next couple of days is, because it's actually a long weekend here in New Zealand, I've got to get some coverage ready for the Chisora card. And as we know, Dave Allen and it looks like Christopher Lovejoy are going to be actually squaring off on that card. So a few thoughts on that, and I have seen a number of people going to a 2018 video of mine in which I sort of profiled Christopher Lovejoy. Very short video, just that was the first time he entered the WBA rankings, and obviously people at the time were like, who is this guy? So yeah, I will be actually doing a bit of an update not to that specific video, but I think just for this fight I'll just do a little bit more of a profile video on Christopher Lovejoy, talking about this fight with Dave Allen, because obviously a lot of people are asking, who is Christopher Lovejoy? And given I'm probably one of the few channels that's actually sort of followed him relatively closely in the past couple of years, I think I can stitch together a mini sort of documentary of sorts just to maybe answer some of those questions. But there is still the big question with that one, and that's where we'll start, is if this fight is on, and that's an if. I have seen on Instagram Lovejoy saying that he's accepted the fight, he's had his medicals, that he was going to be flying out, and he sort of said that he's getting about 100 grand or something in that range, as he always sort of says on his Instagram, bands for thousands of dollars. So he says he's getting 100 bands, as he puts it. I just hope that this fight is going to happen, because I think we've all had for quite some time this question about Lovejoy. How good is Christopher Lovejoy? Because he's been fighting off TV in Mexico. We don't really know. Sure, he's started to put a few more social media clips up in maybe the past year, and that's just in terms of him on the pads or training and all that sort of stuff, but who really knows how good he is? And I was just actually, before I came on to the live stream, I was watching just a little bit earlier Dave Allen talking about Christopher Lovejoy in an Instagram live, and he was effectively saying the same thing, that he doesn't know how good he is. He doesn't really know what his style is. He's a bit of a puncher, but he has no ideas how good he actually is. And he said he thinks that Lovejoy might be one of these guys who talks a big game, but as he put it, is a bit of a fanny. So, Dave Allen is always good for a laugh on a live stream, and I'm hoping that this fight comes off, because it's going to answer a lot of questions about Lovejoy in particular. And we have heard from some heavyweights who he has sparred with that he's actually decent. Johnny Rice told me he's not a bad heavyweight. And so it's all been smoke and mirrors to this point. But perhaps we're actually going to see this happen. And that's what I'm really interested in. Is this going to happen? So we've got 44 in the building, so thank you for joining me, one and all, wherever you are in the world, morning, noon, or night. I do thank you. So it has been a few days, or 5 days, since my last upload. So yeah, for those who were worried about had something happened to me, nope, just really busy with work. But I'm going to chug through quite a few different things the next couple of days. Obviously, I've got to get some coverage out ahead of the Usyk and Chisora card next weekend. So that will feature Dave Allen and also Christopher Lovejoy by the look of it. But we have been here before. He almost was going to fight Nathan Gorman at the last minute. It didn't happen. He went through the medicals, all that sort of stuff. He's been in other fights that was going to happen, and it, in terms of they were made, but they never came through. So I'm hoping if he says he was going to be jumping on a plane, that he did, and we're actually going to see this guy. He's clearly been looking for a decent payday, and he wants to make a mark in the heavyweight division, but it's time for him too, because what is he, 36 years old at the moment, 19-0, who knows how good he really is, lots of knockouts on his record, but he's obviously been facing low-tier opposition. So Dave Allen seems pretty sort of comfortable about facing this guy based on what he's looking at in terms of his record and resume, because it's, nothing really stands out that this guy is going to be a threat, but he's pretty much sight unseen, so it really is sort of hard to tell. And I just see Will Magic Man asking, what do we know about this Lovejoy chap? Well, he's been fighting down in Mexico for the most part. He's only actually had 2 fights in the past, or since the start of 2019. Near the end of 2018 was when he first sort of came onto the radar. He appeared magically in the WBA rankings. And at that point, it was like, well, who is this guy? He has really faced no one. And most of I think all but one of his opponents have losing records. And it's off TV in Mexico. Who knows how good he is? Clearly he's got a punch, he's got some power, but the opponents, they weren't much chop, cab drivers and street sweepers and such. So who really knows how good he is? And that's the big question about this. And this is one of these sort of topics with Lovejoy that we've been discussing for some time. If he can step up and face someone who we actually know the level of, it's actually going to be really interesting to see how good he really is. So, yeah, apparently he's accepted the terms, so we'll see. He's done the medicals. This is all on his social media. There was some bits that he shared about Eddie Hearn saying he signed the contract, so I'm hoping it comes off, because it's been the question for 2 years now, while Lovejoy's been calling out every heavyweight, saying he wants the money fighter, all that sort of stuff. And now he seems to have got a pretty decent payday, probably against a guy that he's looking at in Dave Allen and thinking, well, Allen is at a certain level. He probably thinks that he's going to actually beat him. So, yeah, we've got a lot of questions about Lovejoy, but also, I don't know how good his gas tank is going to be. If you've seen some of his social media, he said, this is just a day or two ago, that he was about 350 pounds and was hoping to be about 335 pounds. And Lovejoy has been a guy who's sort of fluctuated wildly in terms of his weight during his career. He actually got into boxing to some extent for health and fitness reasons, and, joined a gym and started actually, having some success in sparring and other stuff, and then decided, well, I actually can make something of this. And he did, there's been about a variance of about 80 or so pounds in terms of where he's weighed in at his career. And it sounds like, and he has freely admitted for some time, that he's sort of at the heavier end of where he's been weighing. And now it looks like he's going to go in there somewhere 300 pounds plus, which for me, I'm like, yeah, if Dave Allen, who we know is durable, has got a chin, if he can sort of stick out maybe the first 2 or 3 rounds, who knows what Lovejoy's really going to show, because in his fight so far, he's been facing low-tier opposition. It hasn't really gone any rounds to any extent. First and second round knockouts, that sort of stuff. And those guys wouldn't have been able to push him to any real extent. Allen has the chance to do that. Well, I mean, given we don't really know how good Lovejoy is, I'm expecting Allen has a chance to do that. If he can sort of wait out an initial onslaught, potentially, he might be able to actually land something of note. Or is this going to be a case that Dave Allen, who does have some sort of combos that he likes to throw, and he likes to work in that left body shot, which has stopped a couple of guys, Lucas Brown, Samir Nebo. Maybe he's going to look to try to land that on Lovejoy, and Lovejoy at 300 plus pounds. I mean, we don't know how durable Lovejoy is. I mean, he says he's got a chin. He says he is going to go in there and knock Dave Allen out. But yeah, it is an interesting fight for all sorts of reasons. And with Christian Hammer pulling out, for me at least, I was like, well, the Hammer fight was good in terms of, I mean, I think most of us thought that Hammer probably was the favourite to win that one. I saw some people thinking that because Dave Allen had been in Usyk's camp and Alexander Povetkin's camp for a couple of weeks, that sort of thing, that all of a sudden he was going to be a different fighter. I mean, Dave Allen at this point is largely what he is going to be. But it's going to be about the matchmaking and the matchups. And Christian Hammer, I didn't necessarily think was a great matchup for him. But Lovejoy, that might be just right in his wheelhouse. Sure, Lovejoy is big. He seems to be strong. There's really little footage of him floating about. But he seems to be a guy that might actually be, standing in front of Dave Allen and not being, too skilled. I mean, sure, it sounds like he's got a degree of skill in there, but he is a banger from what we hear. So that might sort of suit Dave Allen down to the ground, because if Chris Lovejoy is pretty straight up and down and basic, there's not too many sort of things that Allen has to worry about apart from covering up from those big punches. He's going to see some of it coming from Lovejoy, I'm sure. Anyway, I'll get to the chat here. So 59 in the building. So smash that like button, please, if you could, on the way in or the way out. That would be much appreciated. So 60 in the building, wherever you are, morning, noon, and night. Do thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. So I'll get to the chat now. So it's been going pretty fast here. So I'm just going to start down at the bottom. So if you want to drop a comment here about the Lovejoy and Allen fight for me to weigh in on, or something that you're thinking about this, do it now, please. So Omega says Tony Yoka will fight Peter Milas for the European title at the end of the year. I'll get to that later. So that's not actually confirmed, but I will get to that. So there has been a purse bid called, so it hasn't been confirmed. IB Freely says, make no mistake, there will be no Allen Lovejoy fight. Lovejoy cannot make it into the UK with the current quarantine rules. I'm pretty sure that Eddie Hearn and Matchroom had managed to get some sort of exemptions, this is why he was going to be flying in a week before the fight, because they had managed to, and this was for that last card too, some of the recent fights that they had managed to cut it down instead of 2 to 1 week. So that's why they would have been trying to get Lovejoy on a plane as quickly as possible. So saying that he needs to self-isolate for 14 days, there is exemptions and has been. So this is what they have actually had in place. Toby Plays says, I'm very excited to see Lovejoy in action. I've known about him for a while, and now it's time to see him in action. I'm against someone we will all know and out. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what that, but I get the tenor of the comment there. Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us, it was to the point where I was almost not going to be covering Lovejoy in the channel, because I was sick of the will he, won't he actually be in a fight, that we can, 1, watch, but 2, against someone credible, because he's built his resume online to an extent that it's not really in the ring. Sure, he's got this bloated record, but it wasn't that fans were talking about and the manner of his knockouts, because no one's sort of seen it. It's more about that he's just built a reputation through social media, and that, I guess, that is actually what happens these days to some extent. Swiss Peak says, whatever happened to Spong? Well, he's still training. He trains with Filip Hrgović down in Miami under Pedro Diaz, so he is still there. I saw a shot with him and Hrgović in a photo the other day. So IMPK says, how is Lovejoy going to get around the COVID travel ban? I'll just have a drink of water. So, well, apparently recent people who've been coming in, they have managed to cut the exemption down to a week. So this is why they would have been getting him on a plane as soon as possible. Connor says, Allen by stoppage or points. I mean, it's hard to say because, I mean, we just don't have a gauge on Lovejoy, because what if Lovejoy is this big puncher that we're hearing that he is, and he manages to, I mean, because we have to remember that Dave Allen has taken a lot of punishment in his career. Is there going to be diminishing returns in terms of, you know, what he's bringing? And he has actually been dropping down in weight, getting in better condition. Is his durability going to be slipping over time? I mean, it's a question. He's taken a lot of punishment, and because we don't know how good Lovejoy is, it's sort of hard to call where this fight would go. But I think I'd just be leaning towards an Allen win. The manner of it, I don't know, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Lovejoy all of a sudden shocks us. So Justin says Allen is a pay-per-view star. Well, I mean, he's on a lot of pay-per-views, but I'm not sure that qualifies him as a star. So Amiga says, from Tony Yoka, French promoter. Well, I mean, I read that L'Equipe story, but it hasn't been made at this point. They're talking about negotiations for that fight, but I will come to that. But it is just being called at the moment by the EU, but it hasn't been made. So Daniel says, Allen versus Lovejoy. Yeah, that's good. Like to see this Lovejoy guy. Can't be worse than Alan Babbage. Well, there does seem to be a number of guys floating around in the division right now where there's a gimmick of sorts, that they're working something. So Alan Babbage is working this sort of, I'm a savage, and, you know, I'm just going to go in there and blast you out in 2 or 3 rounds. Lovejoy, he's done his thing online. He's utilized the tools of social media to build a profile to try get himself into a money fight. And he's saying he's getting something like $100,000 for this. So, I mean, I guess if he is got something about him, we're certainly going to see it soon. Or is this just some sort of quick cash out that he's managed to do what he wanted to do? That the 19-0 bloated resume has paid off for him, and he's got a payday, and then he disappears if he loses. I mean, that's a possibility too. Kian says, I think Allen wins by points. Also unrelated, but do you follow the UFC? Yeah, I mean, I guess loosely, I mean, I would definitely sort of fall into that category of fan that would be a casual UFC fan, you know, following the odd big fight, that sort of stuff. That's pretty much it, really, though. I mean, I couldn't tell you, you know, probably after about 3 or 4 people in most divisions who the rest were. Gareth says, like button smash. Thank you very much for that, Gareth. Appreciate that. So 66 in the building. Thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. AZ says, Spong, he just got suspended for PEDs. Well, there was the test ahead of the Usyk fight that there was a failed result. He claimed that he had passed, and that VADA test proved that. It seemed to be that he was talking about, at least from my read of it, previous test, not the one that actually came out, but he hasn't fought since. Some of that could be down to the pandemic, but I don't really know what else has happened in terms of, it seems to be it's hard for them to get Spong fights. He was actually meant to fight in Paris at some point earlier this year. It didn't happen for whatever reason. So IB Freely says, I'll believe it when I see it. And in terms of Allen and Lovejoy, there is that element for me about it as well. Because we've been here before with the Gorman fight. There was other fights that have meant to happen this year. There was one against Chauncey Welliver for Christopher Lovejoy. Other ones too. There's a lot of times when Lovejoy fights don't happen and you don't know why. So hopefully this actually goes through, because like I sort of say, I was almost at the point where I didn't want to cover this guy anymore, because you know, we don't know how good he is. There's no footage of his fights. We can't see any highlights. He hasn't been doing anything of note in the division. He's had 2 low-level fights in 2 years. You know, it begins to get a bit beyond ridiculous. So Justin says, okay, talking to someone else there. Right Hook Boxing says, big up Boxing Squared. Can't stay, just popping in. Hope all is well. Hit the like button. Yes, please. So Right Hook Boxing, he also has a channel. Do support him and subscribe. Great channel. Justin says, Hrgovic versus Allen, let's make it happen. I'd hope that Filip Hrgovic would be aiming a little higher than that, but given on some of the recent opponents, that's not the worst fight that has been sort of suggested for him, but I'd hope he'd be looking for something a bit different, a bit better. I mean, they're talking about it. So Hank says Lovejoy could be another Fujimoto. Well, it's a possibility. We're either going to be highly impressed or maybe highly embarrassed for Christopher Lovejoy, depending on what happens. I mean, I'm expecting maybe he will turn up slightly better than advertised, but I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, maybe he is of a Dave Allen level, that he's got a punch, but he's pretty basic. And yeah, I mean, we will soon see. Fury should fight Cha. Apparently he has a belt or something. So Manuel Cha, yeah, almost 3 years out of the ring. I'll come to Tyson Fury and those opponents a little bit later. So I'm just working through a little bit of the chat here, and then I'll get back to a few different issues. AZ says the Enigma is coming for all this smoke. And Christopher Lovejoy is a massive enigma in the heavyweight division. It is time for him to prove, and actually put up or shut up. Will Magic Man says, will Alan actually train for this fight? I wonder. Well, he has actually been training quite hard in recent months, and he's looking in pretty much near career best or career best shape. So I think in terms of what he's done, I mean, it's probably as good as he could have done. But, I mean, I guess he's looking at Lovejoy going, who knows what this guy's really going to bring. Yeah, I mean, Alan is limited to some extent, but he's durable. He's got some, choreographed combos that he likes to work in there. And that could be one of the things that ultimately, if he does get a stoppage against Lovejoy, I mean, it's either going to be that looping overhand right or the left hook to the body. Crazy D3 says, imagine Dave Allen getting a WBA ranking for beating Lovejoy. And I was thinking about this earlier today. I thought it could happen. It could totally happen. Lovejoy ranked at the back end of the top 15. And I've done videos before on him entering the rankings. And he either, has got an in somewhere or has got, some evidence against someone. Because on the basis of what he's been doing, because remember, he's just recently been ranked in the past couple of months again. Back in, was it the start of August, he got ranked. He was ranked last year. He's been ranked in 2018. Nothing on his resume suggests that he has done anything that he is worthy of being ranked. Remembering he's world number, 400 and something? And that's basically because he hasn't beaten anyone of note. Big Dan says, how can Yoka versus Milas happen for the European title when Dubois versus Joyce is for the vacant title? It's actually two different titles. So the EBU has the EBU title, so the European title, and then there is the EU title. So there's two different titles. Joyce and Dubois is for the EBU title, which is the main one. The EU is like their secondary heavyweight title, I guess, if you were to call it. And if you can only contest that if you're in the EU, which I guess for the UK is maybe a bit hard for them now. Daniel says, thing is, I pretty much only know about this guy because of Mr. Boxing Squared. Yeah, I mean, Christopher Lovejoy to a lot of people is going to come as a surprise. I mean, I've seen, as I was mentioning earlier, a video that I did in 2018, which was basically who is Christopher Lovejoy when he first emerged into the rankings. And I think that question largely sort of is the same. Who is Christopher Lovejoy? How good is he? We just really don't know. Sure, there's some training clips that have emerged over the years, but that's pretty much it. G-Man says, what do you think about White naming Lucas Brown as a guy he wants for Babbage? Well, I think Babbage probably would be looking at Lucas Brown, and Brown's durability these days doesn't seem that great, but it's one of these things. They want to do it for name value, name recognition. Lucas Brown, having beaten Chigayev back in, was it 2016 for that secondary title. It is what it is. I mean, and I'm sure Lucas Brown, if the money is right, he'd take that fight. He's not that picky. It really comes down for money for him these days. But I probably would be picking Babbage to win that one. But Lucas Brown, he can punch. He's never out of that. So, I mean, Babbage, we got to sort of just keep his expectations for him in check. He's at a certain level, and I think he's going to be a fun fighter. Do I think Lucas Brown is a step too far for him? Possibly not. But, when you start getting into the actual, guys in the top 40 or 30, I mean, because Brown, pretty washed at this point. But he can still punch. Connor says, what's your pick, Allen or Lovejoy? I know we don't have much to go on. And that's the thing that makes this hard for me. Allen or Lovejoy. I mean, Allen is a known quantity, and he's got a chin, he's durable, he's got, some things that he does well, but the thing is, for Lovejoy, we don't really know. But based on Lovejoy saying that he's around 350 pounds, and he's probably going to be somewhere around 330-ish, 335 on fight night. I mean, maybe that's just him sort of putting out false narratives on social media, but, I mean, he is looking like he's, pretty thick at the moment, I guess it is. So, if this one goes more than a few rounds, it could be a case that, he might actually start to labour a bit, and the gas tank might just desert him. So Swiss Peak says this is about Spong was cleared, it looks like, after Googling. No, he wasn't cleared. He was putting out a narrowed. He was referring to previous tests from training camp that he had passed. But the way that it was sort of couched in public was it was referring to the one that he'd alleged to have failed. But actually, that wasn't the case. So it all went quiet after that, and we don't really know what happened. But there has been nothing from VADA to say that that test that he was alleged to have failed, that he did actually, that it was some sort of false positive or anything like that. Justin says, okay, he's talking to Big Dan. Okay, I'll just scroll down here. Comments are moving extremely quickly. I might have to just bail on the chat soon to just get back to my list soon, but I'll just try for another couple of minutes. Swiss Peak says BS is a big Lovejoy fan. Well, I wouldn't say I'm a fan, but because I've never seen him fight. That's the thing. But he's a curiosity and an oddity, and someone else described him as an enigma. That's really what he is. Will says Alan is a hard man who just happens to do a bit of boxing on the side. That may be enough though for him against Christopher Lovejoy. Big Dan says, let's be honest, Fury should be fighting Michael Hunter. I'm fine with Caballal or Takam, but Hunter poses the biggest threat. I do agree that I think that Hunter probably does, out of those three names, pose the next biggest threat to Fury if he was to face them. When I heard the news from Bob Arum that it was either Caballal or Takam, and Caballal's one that I instantly thought he fits all the criteria. In terms of Carlos Takam, he's actually just outside the WBC top 15. He's at 16. But I mean, if a fight was to happen in December and he was the guy, remembering it's October the 24th, WBC's got a couple of opportunities to update their rankings before the time of that fight. So it wouldn't shock me to see Takam come back in. But when you consider that Carlos Takam has effectively been fighting at a pretty, pedestrian level, he's had 4 fights since he lost to knockout loss to Derek Chisora. Sure, that was a fun fight, but he lost. He was knocked out. He is a guy now that is 39. He's going to be, he'll be on the verge of being 40 at the time of the fight. I think his birthday might even be the next day. But he's been slowing down for some time. He's got a record that it's 39-5. He's challenged for a world title, but he has clearly been on the decline. And they've had this path of, say, Senad Gashi, Craig Lewis, Fabio Maldonado, and Jerry Forrest. 3 of those, Craig Lewis, Fabio Maldonado, and Jerry Forrest, all by decision. None of them were great fights, and he hasn't looked that great. I mean, I have heard some people sort of still describing Carlos Takam as a top 20 heavyweight, but for me, he's closer to top 40. He has been slowing down, hasn't been looking great, and if this fight was to be made against Tyson Fury, I don't actually think it's, for me at least, it's not a great fight. There's not a lot of, interest or intrigue for me. He's, close to 40, fading, whereas the Caballal fight, out of the 2 options, for me, is a much better option. At least you've got a guy who's approaching his prime. He's undefeated. And the names that he's fought in more recent times are better than Carlos Takam's. It's just a cut above where Takam has been facing. I mean, they've actually, his co-promoter, Star Boxing, and remembering Takam is also with Top Rank, they've been talking about Takam getting a title shot and being ready and waiting. And I'm sure for him, it would be fantastic. It'd be like winning the lottery. Remember, he was called in at late notice because in 2017, Kubrat Pulev was injured. He couldn't fight Anthony Joshua. Takam gets elevated to get a title shot. He was Johnny on the spot. And I guess in terms of having a fight for activity and staying busy, Carlos Takam, sort of ticks a lot of those boxes where I think there's, a certain amount of risk, but it's manageable for Tyson Fury, who I think would just outbox Carlos Takam with ease. Ajit Caballal, for me, is a more interesting fight. I still think Tyson Fury wins that. Michael Hunter, I think there is more risk with that, but Michael Hunter's not in the tent. I mean, Bob Arum has named 2 fighters that are co-promoted by Top Rank. And this is why they're in line for the fight. Oscar Rivas was another name that's been mentioned, also co-promoted by Top Rank. So if Michael Hunter was to ever get a shot against Tyson Fury for this next fight or even a future fight, he's probably going to have to sign a deal, some sort of deal with Top Rank. Let's face it, that's one of the realities. These promotional silos, for as much as people sort of ignore them, they do exist, and it does actually matter in the context of matchmaking. So, yeah, for me, Carlos Takam, no. I mean, I'm not really interested in that. And I know some people will say, oh, well, he fought Anthony Joshua a couple of years ago, and he's fought some other big names, yada yada yada. But he's even at the point that he fought Joshua, he was still past prime in my view. Sure, he put up a relatively credible effort in that fight, but he was losing wide on the cards, and there were the ending wasn't great, but he wasn't really in that fight to the point where he was pushing Joshua close to a loss or something like that. And since then, he's been knocked out by Chisora, and he's fought Senagashi, Craig Lewis, Fabio Maldonado, and Jerry Forrest. That sort of run is not a title run of opponents. And, there's other guys in the division that are doing the same. I mean, you look at Joseph Parker, Alexander Flores, Alex Leopai, and then you have Shaundale Winters, who he fought, and now he's going to face Junior Farr. And that's basically got him at the top of the WBO rankings or close to it. It's like, this sort of matchmaking, these sort of, limping through to a title. Even Kubrat Pulev has done that as well, and this has taken him years to get there. And I know that there has been talk that he may be injured, and this has sort of been floating around. I haven't seen any hard evidence of that. I have seen a couple of posts in Kubrat Pulev related sort of Instagram pages, one being Pulev Sport, this seems to still be on, and he's talking about, going in there and beating up Joshua, etc. So, I mean, it sounds like that fight is on. But getting back to Fury, yeah, I mean, there's been some other guys that have been calling him out as well as in this past week. Jermaine Franklin. So I'm just getting back to a page that I had up ready to roll for this one. So he said, what do you think about two undefeated heavyweights getting it on? Two undefeated heavyweights, US versus UK. The world would love to see this. My hand is up, Tyson. Hit me up. So, yeah, I mean, Jermaine Franklin saying the world would love to see it. I mean, I think in terms of options that would be out there, it'd be certainly further down the list of fights that people want to see. Marius Vuk also has called out Tyson Fury, bearing in mind they've sparred together before, they're known to each other. He's saying, Tyson Fury, if you need a real fight, I am fit and ready to go on December 5th. Yeah, obviously this is not the sort of names that I'm hoping to see him in, but maybe we have to keep expectations in check, that if they're going into some sort of big fight with Anthony Joshua potentially in 2021, maybe they are looking for the lesser, risk options, and maybe Carlos Takam fits that. But I'm hoping that throwing in of Takam is more of a sort of, misdirection, and it's going to be Cabello. Fresh fight, undefeated. I'd much prefer to see that. And Cabello is actually a talented fighter. I would pick Cabello to beat Takam all day. I know some people seem to, for whatever reason, because fights Carlos Takam has been in but lost, seem to rate him terrifically high inside the top 20. I don't see it anymore. He's been on the decline. I think he's close to the top 40 at this point. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but I do think it's an accurate one. Well, in my view it is, but of course that's my opinion, so I'm going to back that. So just getting down to the chat here. So we've got Truth Son saying, Lovejoy, it's me, mate. Shh. Okay, I do know who that is. So I did see your tweet at me on Twitter. I don't actually... I can't say for one way or the other if it is actually happening, because it's about a week out or so. Apparently he's getting on a plane. Apparently he's going to be fighting Dave Allen. But I've been waiting for the official confirmation. So after 3 years, I finally have managed to get on the Matchroom press release list. Previously, I'd emailed and got nothing back. So finally, I'm on it now. And they do actually send out quite a few different press releases. And I haven't seen one confirming. And if one comes out, we'll know that it's on. But to this point, I haven't seen it. Crazy D3 says, if Pulev is injured, let's see if the IBF has the audacity to make Charles Martin the mandatory challenger. Well, he has actually won an eliminator, so he's in the number 2 spot. So if Kubrat Pulev is injured, it would be Charles Martin by default. And perhaps this is the reason they have not made a fight for Charles Martin at this point, that they've thought, actually, let's just wait and see. This fight's meant to be happening at the end of the year. Let's not put you in a fight that actually precludes you from being available to. But if Kubrat Pulev was injured, then, it'd be hard to see him getting another shot. This has happened, and it took him almost 3 years to get back to having that shot that he had won. So, yeah, I mean, and they made him go through another eliminator against Huey Fury, and since then he's been eking it out to try get to that title shot, having a couple of stay busies against the likes of Rydell, Booker, etc. Okay, so I'm getting back to the chat here. Will Magic Man says he likes Makhmadov, brings KOs to all his fights. A fight with Dubois would be interesting. Makhmadov and any of the the really top prospects would be interesting, because I'm sure that most of them would be outboxing him. They'd be lighting him up and they would be countering him. But he would probably be trying to walk through some of this to get his own work away. And if he can get it away, that's where it gets interesting. Omega says that... where was that? The chat moves very quickly. The Cuban Flash Sanchez is a future threat. Yeah, he's looking like he's going to be a decent sort of top 20 guy. For how long? Who knows? I mean, he really needs some opportunities. So he's got this fight coming up with Brian Howard on November 7th. I mean, I know some people are okay with that fight. I was hoping for a little bit better. Crazy D3 says, I can imagine Takam replacing Chisora Usyk in the WBC top 15. Yeah, well, I guess with that fight happening at the end of this month, one of them, so Takam, who's at number 16, could be Johnny on the spot to just raise one by default. And all of a sudden, maybe, that could end up being an option that's viable, because they're going to have whoever it is ranked. Preferably top 10, but, we'll see. G-Man says he hopes that Pulev isn't injured. He needs need this fight done. Well, if he is injured, it may be a case like the first time that the IBF is like, well, if you want to get back to the spot, you're going to have another final eliminator. And then once you get to a title shot with all the sort of, if Joshua or whoever maintains 2 or 3 titles, so that mix of mandatories, it'd be like 2023 before you get shot again, or 2022, something like that. Marcus says, what happens with Miller? Is there a new ban? So his case has just sort of been kicked out. So it hasn't been resolved at this point. But I did note he's only just realized that there was a failed test for Jerry Forrest, who had some cannabinoids in his system. So it obviously, that test was failed, but it was only picked up after the fight. Boxing politics, that he's only getting criticized and no one's talking about Jerry Forrest. But the thing that he fails to realize was that the news about Forrest came out like about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Miller's only just realized in the past week. So AZ says he's not interested in Franklin. He is very basic. Yeah, I'm not really interested in that fight at this point. He's laboured with guys like Jerry Forrest and Rydell Booker. He hasn't really proven he's anything more than top 50. I mean, maybe he's improving. Maybe he's not in his prime yet, but he needs to do better, and he needs to actually have on TV an impressive performance to get people going, actually, he's ready for bigger and better fights. Because at this point, some of the guys that he's been facing have been somewhere between top 50 and top 100, and he hasn't looked great. Even against Pavel Sauer, who's a guy, has been knocked out a number of times. Filip Hrgovic, even Huey Fury starched him in 3 rounds. I mean, Franklin took him the distance. That's not a great sort of, thing to have on your resume. IMPK says, if Usyk gets put to sleep by Chisora, would his heavyweight aspirations be put to bed for good, or could he eventually recover? That's a really interesting question. I think if, in terms of title aspirations, perhaps it would sort of make it much harder for him to get towards a title shot. But I think for a lot of us, I mean, when he's fighting the guys that are the really tall timber of the division, 6'6", 6'7", etc., or Tyson Fury, higher, that's, it becomes much tougher fights. Guys like Chisora, who are in and around his height, or even a little, Usyk's the bigger man there, at least in terms of the height. He's going to be more comfortable with that because that's what he's used to. But if he does lose, there is a big what next question for Usyk, and what's he going to do? How far can he go? And then people will say, well, should he have actually been, stayed at cruiserweight? But I guess, his aspirations, wanting to follow in the footsteps of guys like Evander Holyfield, can't blame him at all. So Truth Sun says, even numbers for news and views. Appreciate that super chat. So I've got a few people saying that the stream is lagging. apologies if it is. So I'm on Wi-Fi. Maybe there is a little bit of it, but apologies for that. So 85 in the building. So thank you for joining me wherever you are, morning, noon, or night. Just working through these comments here, and then I'll get to my next topic, which I'll get to Tony Yoka and Peter Milas. And the L'Equipe story on the French media actually had one of my tweets from about 18 months ago. Obviously, it's hard to find footage of Peter Milas, and I had some highlights of a fight against Denis Baktov on my Twitter. I've used that, so yeah, no, I thought I thought that was quite funny, actually. Next comment. Puliev to me is a guy who talks a big game but doesn't have the heart to back it up. He gets mouthy and brave with Vlad and got chinned. Same will happen versus AJ. Well, if that fight's going to happen, hopefully he's not injured. Hopefully it's in the ring. I mean, there's a lot of these fights we've been waiting on all year. I mean, some of them which are really interesting, others maybe less so. I mean, with this one, there's less intrigue for me, but I'm just hoping we can clear it off the books and we can start talking about fresh fights, you know, fresh matchups, because it just sort of feels like we've been sort of, you know, walking in treacle the whole year. So just seeing a few people saying that their stream is lagging. So yeah, apologies for that. Hopefully it is actually getting better. I can see that it's saying that there's a few dropped frames at my end, but hopefully that does get better, or doesn't seem to get too much. So Croesus is in the building. Hello to you too. Ness says, salute Boxing Squared. Salute to you as well. Will says, let's be honest, Puliev has little chance. It'll be a walk in the park for Joshua. Usyk's hand and leg speed too fast for Chisora. Will make Chisora look slow. Yeah, I mean, I think if Usyk is still... Because there's some questions about Usyk. I mean, he's basically been out of the ring for 2 years. Didn't look great against Chaz Witherspoon. He's had injuries. Few open questions there. But if he's still the Usyk of old, he should be able to handle Derek Chisora. I did see a clip a little while ago that David Haye put up and sort of saying, well, see, look at this version of Derek Chisora is just going to, you know, really take it to Alexander Usyk. But it was Chisora versus Takam, and Takam was standing directly in front of him. Like, that's not what's going to be happening in the ring at the time. And I did actually talk about this in a recent video on Patreon. David Haye is just in everything to do with Derek Chisora, and it's like, you know, come on, man, just let Chisora have his moment. Get out of the way. Stop being a narcissist. I mean, we don't need to be seeing David Haye all the time. Sure, he's managing him, but it doesn't need to be about David Haye. So Adam Fahey says Usyk isn't getting put to sleep by Del Boy, and Swiss Peaks agrees with that, saying Chisora is massively overrated. Adam says massively overrated as a puncher. Ness says Usyk's defense is better than his opponent's at his weight. I'll get to my next topic, actually, because I was, a couple of things. Thanks again to those who reached out this week, because I wasn't able to get any videos up for, I think it was about 5 days, just swamped with work. For those who were listening earlier, apologies for repeating that, but the viewership does turn over during this the stream, so wasn't able to get up anything up because I was just swamped with work. Getting home and just absolutely shattered. So I tried to do a video on Wednesday, but I just couldn't, with the tiredness and all that, mentally fatigued. Just couldn't seem to get the words out. It was just mistakes galore, and I was like, no, I'll just pack it up. Intended to do this live stream last night, but got home about 8 o'clock and was just absolutely zonked. So yeah, no, had a very good sleep, about 9 or 10 hours last night, so I was ready to roll this morning. So there will be some coverage going up over the weekend of ahead of the fight, the Usyk Chisora card. So need to do something for the main event, and obviously Allen versus Lovejoy, which that fight seemingly is going to happen. So if it does happen, it's Christopher Lovejoy. We're going to see what he's actually made of. But there was another couple of things happening this week that I thought was quite interesting. Well, apart from it, I'm sure he was getting decent money to face Dave Allen. He was out with COVID. I mean, it's just one of these things we're going to see that sort of happening. Lenroy Thomas, he was actually calling out Dave Allen, and Dave Allen was calling out Lenroy Thomas. I wouldn't have minded to see that, but I wasn't necessarily super excited about it. I'd much rather see the unknown Christopher Lovejoy and sort of see what this guy is actually made of, because we've been talking about it forever and a day. Joe Joyce, he is back in the UK. So he's training in the UK ahead of his fight with Daniel Dubois, which is at the end of November. He's actually been sparring with, and this is stuff I saw on social media, Fabio Wardley. So yeah, that's some good sparring to get. And Joe Joyce versus Daniel Dubois, another of these fights we've been waiting for. It is one of the better fights left in the schedule for the year. So we're going to have some decent, in terms of the importance and the relevance in the heavyweight division, some decent fights coming up. Alexander Usyk versus Derek Chisora, the rematch, Dillian White, Alexander Povetkin, Joyce Dubois, then rounding out with Joshua and Kubrat Pulev. So it's kind of like this last 2 weeks, as I was alluding to earlier, it's just really been quite quiet. And the fact that Dave Allen and Christopher Lovejoy news has been, really bubbling up and being one of the major talking points, just shows you just how quiet it has been. But also this week, I'll get to this before getting on to the Tony Yoka stuff. Anthony Joshua had weighed in on stuff regarding Deontay Wilder, saying perhaps he's sitting back at home, in his lab, trying to come up with some sort of master plan. And for those who had sort of said, well, where's Deontay Wilder? He did actually emerge. There was some Instagram story stuff this week. He was at home in his kitchen with some of his family or friends, and something was going on. But it wasn't necessarily the sort of, maybe the statement people have been waiting for. So obviously reports of the autopsy were grossly exaggerated. So he is doing well. He is alive. Is he injured? We don't know. How's he feeling about this fight with Tyson Fury, the third one falling through? Who knows? It is one of these questions where you're like, what is really going on? Because we don't really know. His co-manager, Shelley Finkel, is telling us it's all okay. He's, ready and willing and able to fight Tyson Fury anytime, any place, but the fight's gone. The contract expired and happened. I mean, is it gross negligence, or was it they just let it expire? I mean, there's all these open questions. But in terms of Tony Yoka, so the EBU, on its website, so I just went and had a check out this morning. So, I mean, and as someone sort of said before, Joyce Dubois, how can there be Tony Yoka fighting for the title? But there's actually two titles. So there's the European title, which Joyce and Dubois are fighting for, and then there's the EU title. So that has been ordered. So it's Peter Milas versus Tony Yoka. So the deadline for the purse offers is Thursday, 29th of October, 2020 at 12 noon. So this fight hasn't been made. So there were other instances where, say, Joe Joyce, for example, has been ordered in quite a few different fights by the EBU. But for this one, for the European Union title, Peter Milas, who's an undefeated, goes in a favourite. I mean, if you were to say Tony Yoka is a top tier prospect, or Peter Milas is in that sort of second tier of prospects behind them, sort of in those 10 or 15 guys that are behind the sort of top 6 or 7 guys. So it's not a bad fight by any stretch. Both are undefeated. And for Tony Yoka, I think in terms of beating a guy that's fighting a guy that's got an unbeaten record, who's got some ambition, it's actually probably going to be, at least for stretches, maybe a competitive fight. But I would pick Tony Yoka to win that one. But just to reiterate, it hasn't been made, but they're looking to make it. And I think it makes sense for Tony Yoka. I was a little surprised on the Peter Milas, sort of thinking, are they ready? Are they willing to take that opportunity? But maybe they are, because I'm sure the money would actually be, significantly better than anything that Milas has had so far. And as I mentioned, there was some French media coverage. L'Equipe had actually reported on this, and they actually used one of my tweets from about 18 months ago. So I was a bit chuffed about that. Anyway, I'm just getting off those websites at the moment, getting back to the chat. It's pretty much that everything that was on my list actually that we've got through, and there was actually also, which I didn't mention last week. So Murat Gassiev no longer taking on Kevin Johnson. He will be facing Sefer Safiri on the 31st of October, which is, for me, I was like, whatever. Coming to the other video that I had done about Gassiev facing Johnson, saying, no, he's facing Safiri, you're wrong. And it's like, well, it was right at the point that I did the video. I mean, I always wonder about people who leave those sorts of comments. Are they going back to television stations and newspapers and all that sort of stuff, days after something that actually had happened, but then it changed, to say, actually, no, this is what's happening. I mean, it just always seems to me so strange. Anyway, back to the chat. So D. Ubinali says, forget Wilder, he's a retired fighter. Jay Billow says, I'm still hoping on Kabial versus Fury. Or for me, there's more interest in that fight than a Takam fight, that's for sure. I mean, if, Oscar Rivas was another option, that's still, for me, a better option than Carlos Takam. Rivas versus Takam was going to be happening on Top Rank, so I don't know whatever happened to that. So Bill Billy says he got a weird feeling about this Parker versus Farr fight. I think it will be close, a good scrap. Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's going to be some sort of blowout. I mean, I think it could be close and competitive, especially early on. Junior Farr is the bigger fighter with a bigger reach. He's probably going to be looking to use those tools, work the jab. It probably could take Parker rounds to break him down. Creaser says Deontay's master plan for his career is like Ferrari's master plan for this F1 season. I haven't been following F1, so I'm not sure what that really is in reference to, but I take it that they're not doing as well this year. I don't know. Jay Billow says Wilder hasn't spoken about anything boxing related. Too much silence. People are losing faith. Well, I think just with this whole situation, given Deontay Wilder has been so vocal on social media before, I think there was an expectation. Fury announcing he was walking away from the third fight might spur Deontay Wilder into saying something. But it hasn't. I mean, maybe there is some potential legal action coming and he's been told don't say anything, but who knows? What about Kenzie and Trey Morrison? How they look for you, says Abasai. Yeah, I mean, I'm not convinced. I mean, I think they sort of fall into that camp where they've been fighting at a certain level. They've been looking good at a certain level, but I'm not sure how much they've got to take it to the next level. IB Freely says, I just realised we have bare knuckle boxing with elbows going on in Poland right now, and it's lit. DT says, the next Milas opponent, as per Croatian media from yesterday, is Ali Durmaz. Marcus says, haven't seen the Morrison brothers, only read about them. I've seen some of because I do follow them on social media. Some of them do post both of them do post occasional clips of some of their fights, but they've been fighting at fairgrounds and stuff like that. I mean, it's at a certain level. I mean, they're sort of, I did actually consider, one or both to be in this year's iteration of Pretender or Contender. But I did, because I have about 6 or 7 guys in that video. I've done that last year and this year, and I thought, no, I'll just wait till next year, and if they haven't sort of stepped up or fought anyone of note, that they would likely be in that version, because it is one of these things, and there's a lot of fighters like that are carrying bloated records. Christopher Lovejoy obviously is one. We have no idea how good they are. Actually, he made that version this year for Pretender and or Contender. Unga says, Trey fights very aggressive, little defense, similar to his old man, not as good. Liam says, I think power is there. Django has an iron chin. I heard that 3 people have busted their hands on his head in sparring. Oh, that was one other thing that I was going to cover. I couldn't actually find a way to watch it this week. Justice Huni facing Whainga Opilu. So that was for the Australian heavyweight title. Opilu was actually the holder. Justice Huni, having his first pro fight, wins the title. So he gets the win, and I think in a 7th round stoppage, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But yeah, I was a little bit gutted that I couldn't find, that was on Thursday, which would have been, it was a bit of a weird sort of midweek type of fight, but yeah, I'm still if someone can direct me to where that fight is, or if there's some sort of version floating around, keen to have a look at that, because Justice Huni, I do rate him. I think he is going to be one of the next wave of prospects that come through that are going to garner a lot of hype and buzz, and yeah, I think he certainly is one for the future, one to watch. So Unga says Kenzie is a good technical boxer, good movement, but needs to fight a live body. And that's part of the problem for the Morrison brothers. They haven't really been fighting anyone of note. Big Dan says Gassiev is fighting Nuri Safiri, I believe, not Sefer Safiri. Okay, apologies for that. Connor says it's not Safiri anymore, he has COVID. Okay, well, Murat Gassiev trying to get an opponent seems to be, a bit tough at the moment. So I'm not sure what happened with the Johnson fight. If anyone knows, let me know. So Fish says, what's the opinion if Luke chooses Gorman? Well, I'm sure that would make Gorman's year, actually. I hope it's not a Nathan Gorman fight, because based on what we saw against Richard Lartey, I mean, it's hard to know where Nathan Gorman is actually going. If he is above British level, I mean, maybe Commonwealth level is his lot. I don't know, but I mean, I would hope that it's not Nathan Gorman. Because if it is, that really is, I guess, a gift in terms of giving him, it'd be a substantial payday. And people wouldn't be interested in a certain section of boxing fans that would be, but yeah, it'd be, yeah, I wouldn't like that at all. So Pacer says, salute Boxing Squared, salute to you as well. Adam says, let's get all the Safaris in the right to collect a right hand each. In the ring, he says. Creases says, it's like the first fight ever for this. Okay, I'm jumping into someone's conversation there. So if you've got any questions or other things about the topics that we've covered, or if you saw the Justice Huni fight, do let me know what you thought of it. I'm keen to watch that today or tomorrow, and I'll probably do my own video on that as well, because that was one that I missed for the life of me, and I know that there was quite a few others that just couldn't find a way to watch it. And I got to say that some of the services out there are starting to get really good, and my VPN was beaten. So as soon as that happened, it sort of cut down my options to watch that fight. Jay Billow says, I enjoyed Justice Huni's debut. It looks similar to Cabial to me, but it was his debut versus a top 50. Not sure Opelio was top 50. I mean, he's more, top 60, top 70, something like that. But that's a bit of a statement in itself, facing a guy for your first fight who's in the top 100. You don't see that often. Pacer says, Pulev, is he injured again? Well, it's a big question. I don't know if he is, but I mean, that's the talk. So thank you to Unger for sending me a link to the Huni fight. I am going to be watching that, and I think Liam may have just posted the same, so I appreciate that. AZ says Gassiev is cursed. Well, it sort of seems to be, with opponent changes and injuries, all sorts. It's been a long wait for him to have his first fight at heavyweight. There's been rumours that Charles Martin is replacing Pulev. Well, if Pulev is out, it will be Charles Martin, because he has won an eliminator which got him to the number 2 spot, which is, as we know, often called not rated in the IBF. He would be Johnny on the spot. He would be the guy that they would look to next. So thanks for the link there, Liam. Much appreciated. Creaser says, what do you think? How good is Milas? He's actually, he's a decent fighter, but I mean, Tony Yoka is a cut above in my opinion. It's kind of like Filip Hrgović, his fellow Croat. If him and Milas fought, I'd be picking Filip Hrgović to beat Milas. As I sort of mentioned, Milas is like in that sort of second tier of prospects, sort of behind the likes of Dubois, Yoka, Hrgović, all those sorts of guys, Makhmudov. Will Stokes says, I just searched for it on YouTube. Someone has a highlights video that there's literally every round aside from the first, but it's all a bit sped up. Huni looks good, not in love with his power. IB Freely says, I know he's talking about something in Poland. Benjo says, just heard there's no action from the BBBOC on corrupt Judge O'Connor, who was on his phone. No surprise there, so it's infuriating. So I saw that, there was that interview with Robert Smith, basically saying he didn't see what the controversy was. If he was on a phone, he should be out of it. But then I did see a clip during the week that suggested maybe he was looking at his card, and that he was moving his hand and whatever was in, so it could have been cardboard, his card. I don't know. I mean, it certainly looked dodgy as well, but why is he looking at his card mid-fight anyway, or mid-round, I should say? Shouldn't he be sort of looking at that between rounds? Hi, Marcus says, do you think Michael Hunter is going to disappear like Mike Perez? Both are without a promoter. In this day and age, it's very hard to sort of maintain position if you don't have a promoter, and especially a big promoter. I mean, often we have guys that seem to make a bit of noise, that they could be good, they could be in some good fights, but they just don't have the push, or they're with a much smaller promoter who just can't seem to get traction for them. And I think a lot of us were expecting, well, Michael Hunter, his services would be snapped up when he was released by Matchroom USA, but just hasn't really happened. Some of that may also be down to, he's at a certain level now. He's generally sort of thought about as, either just inside the top 10 or just outside the top 10, at least in the top 15. he should, he'll have expectations of getting paid a certain amount too, and that's probably going to hinder his, depend with the situation, is going to want to sign people on the cheap, and why would he want to do that? But it could end up sort of leaving a bit of a stalemate for him in terms of signing on with someone. Pacer says, what did you think of the Lomachenko versus Lopez fight? Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I did sort of think that Lomachenko just left his run a little bit too late. I mean, he was outboxed and outthought for different stretches of that, and Lopez's speed seemed to be giving him issues, and the power, obviously, he was wary of it. I enjoyed the fight. I thought it was closer than some of the cards suggested, but I was sort of thinking going into that 12th round that Loma had to win it, that 12th round, to just get a draw. So I had it 7-5 on my card. I could see maybe a draw at a stretch, but I had no issue with the in terms of the winner. I just thought some of those cards were a bit wide. Will says, brilliant win for his first fight. 95% of prospect fight guys with losing records, let alone someone with a legitimate title. And yeah, BoxRec had him ranked at around 50th position, right or not? Jay Bello says, Justice Huni has a bigger upside than Caballero, in my opinion. Apparently his management want to fast track him. 21 years old. I mean, it's all well and good to sort of saying that they want to fast track him, but a lot of things have to end up falling into place for that to happen. And often that can be a situation where belts are sort of, dropped and that sort of thing. So there ends up being, belts all over the place. I mean, you could certainly argue, I think Joseph Parker, that he was in the right, space, the right rankings, the right time to pick up an opportunity for a vacant title. And that's why him and Andy Ruiz Jr. fought for that vacant title. But if the belts are locked up, they say one fighter or two fighters has 2 or 3 belts at a time, it becomes so much harder to fast track someone into a title shot because there's such a queue developing. Have you heard the Cop interview with Suleiman? Mike goes all in on him. No, I haven't. But is that on The Athletic, on their podcast? Because I am subscribed to The Athletic, so I can certainly listen to that. Yeah, this week was a bit of a write-off for me, just in terms of the channel and actually managing to get content up. Just was really busy, really fatigued by the end of the day. Just couldn't do it. But yeah, I'm back, and there's going to be quite a bit of content coming up in the next couple of days, and we're sort of moving into a period where we're about to hit, a lot of good heavyweight fights coming up. So I'm really looking forward to that, because it's just been so stop-start, and it sort of felt like that for the channel too, because, obviously when there's lots of fights going on, I'm able to cover them and put content up and all that sort of stuff. But when you have weeks at a time where you don't get much going on, I mean, certainly a lot of boxing fans sort of drift away. So, when there is a lot of fights on, it's good for me, good for you. I mean, good for, just boxing in general. So hopefully we're coming into a period where, we can get excited about what's going on, because sometimes it's just, there's been just too many lulls in 2020. It's been a pretty, bad year just in general with everything going on. Boxing is certainly caught up in that too. So Will says, Charles, anyone want to buy a belt, Martin? It'd be interesting, because he'd be certainly walking into a decent payday. I know some people were, should that have been an eliminator between him and Gerald Washington? Because at the time they were, I think it was number 6 and number 11 in the IBF, something there or thereabouts, and the winner, that was Charles Martin, stopped Gerald Washington, promoted to number 2 spot. There was talk he would have to have another eliminator, but obviously that's gone away for the time being. And perhaps he hasn't been announced in a fight as they want to see. Is Pulev going to actually be in this fight? If he is injured, Charles Martin will be the guy, Johnny on the spot. I hope he's training, that's for sure. Liam says he does think that DNL... Dean Lonergan will struggle to get the best fights for Justice Huni. Big risk, low reward. There'll be kind of like maybe like Joe Joyce to some extent. Get certain fights, good sort of prospect level fights above where other prospects would be fighting. But then maybe they'll struggle to get some of the ones that maybe they will want to get. And that's sort of maybe Aslanbek Makhmadov's been a little bit in that camp. High risk, low reward. So I do think, it's especially if they're fighting in Australia and they're not connected to a bigger promoter, could be a bit tougher. But even, being with a big promoter is no guarantee that you're going to get the right push. Arguably, Filip Hrgović has been brought along slower than Hrgović and Sauerland have wanted. Part of the reason for joining Matchroom was to get him to that next step. And you could argue that he hasn't been in the sort of fights that he has said that he's ready for. Swiss says, did you see the 119-109 score on the Loma Lopez card? Yeah, I kind of thought that was ridiculous. Will says, I knew we'd get round to Loma and Lopez eventually. Lubak says, Lovejoy versus Babbage would be interesting after Dave Allen gets mauled by Lovejoy. Well, yeah, there's a lot to like about that Dave Allen and Lovejoy fight. The question mark factor about Lovejoy is, but that's got to be him against anyone at this point. We don't really know what his level is. Pacer says, why do we need this extra weight class in the heavyweight division? Well, it's not, technically it won't be the heavyweight division. Well, I mean, I know that they were proposing to call it Bridgerweight after that kid who saved his sister from a dog, but I mean, it seems to be they've gone a bit quiet on the name and what it's actually going to be. But a weight class up to 224 pounds, I mean, we don't need extra weight classes. I mean, it's a complete race to the bottom by the WBC, as per usual. But, I mean, if it starts to get traction, maybe the others will follow suit. But I'm glad that we haven't heard anything from the others at this point that they're going to do it. I don't think it's needed. I mean, what could end up happening, and I was talking about this in a video on Patreon just recently, we could end up seeing cruiserweight, there's less money in it. That just could become the new division. It sort of could be perceived the same way. Banjo says, is it Friday or Saturday in New Zealand? It is Saturday morning, 9:50 a.m. I can confirm that. Will says, I actually believe Allen has a rod class chin. Price dropped Povetkin with a bit of a throwaway shot, and from what I remember has rocked Chisora with a throwaway shot as a round ended. I think Price, that was actually when he sort of hit Chisora. That was right at the end of the fight. It looked like Chisora sort of, was rocked and sort of, partially took a knee or was halfway down, but the ref jumped in and called it off because obviously Chisora had been putting it on Price. But because that clip was floating around on social media as well. But they were saying that Chisora's chin had passed the test, I should say. Marcus says, read that Romanov is returning against, is that Ljakovic? Is it confirmed? All I have seen is that he is returning in early November, but I haven't seen an opponent that has been confirmed at this point. But sometimes, I mean, kind of like the Gassiev fight, I mean, it seems to be that it can change, in a heartbeat. 3 or 4 different names are sort of put up, and then finally someone turns up in the ring. Will says, Allen took straight rights from Price clean all night, and of course he got stopped, but never did he look shaken or anything like that. So I'm 99% sure Allen isn't getting dropped or legitimately KO'd. Yeah, I mean, it could be a case that Lovejoy throws the kitchen sink at him early on, and we could actually maybe see a case that, because Lovejoy, if he's over 300 pounds, and he's never been past a couple of rounds. He's been knocking guys out in the first or second, just really gas and tire. And Allen takes over. And maybe Dave Allen stops Christopher Lovejoy inside 6 rounds. Not so much because he dominates him or anything like that, because tiredness, fatigue starts to set in, and he could be there for the taking. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I can't see this fight would really surprise me. Which fight is better, Dubois versus Joyce or Usyk versus Chisora? I guess that's sort of a taste and sort of preference thing, really. I mean, they're both good fights. I mean, they're for different reasons, too. Usyk versus Chisora, we can sort of see Alexander Usyk coming up from cruiserweight in a real test at heavyweight. How's he going to look? Also, with a couple of years out of the ring, has he lost a step? Is he still the same Alexander Usyk? Dubois versus Joyce, it's going to answer some questions potentially about Daniel Dubois. I mean, remembering after that fight against Nathan Gorman, optimism that, he was going to be up and away, but then sort of ended up being in fights with the likes of Ebenezer Tete and Kyotaru Fujimoto and facing, pretty low-level opposition. And Joyce is going to be the best name on his resume by far. And we know that Joyce has got a chin. He hits hard, not necessarily the biggest puncher, but his he throws a lot of those punches and hard thudding shots. Hopefully we can see Dubois put under a bit of pressure, tested. I mean, is it too much too soon, or is Dubois ready for this and he's going to make Joyce basically look silly and he's going to dominate him? Because I mean, obviously ahead of the Gorman fight, there were some people predicting that Gorman could beat Dubois. So, yeah, I mean, there's just, lots of good questions about these fights, and they're actually a lot more competitive than some of the other dross that we often get thrown up, and that's why it's good. Unger says, don't expect too much early from Huni. He's still got the Olympics. And they have signaled that he is going to drop back down. So I wouldn't expect that he's going to have any more than 3 or 4 fights before, if the Olympics do happen in 2021, because he will want to, obviously keep eligibility, all that sort of stuff, and, not chance his arm too much. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about fighting now, that's good for him. It's going to be better than some of the opponents that he could get in, because the amateur ranks has been sort of decimated, tournaments aren't happening and all sorts of stuff. So he's getting some decent sparring in Australia, and if he's getting into some good fights like this one that he was just in for the Australian heavyweight title, it's actually meaningful for him in terms of his development ahead of going to the Olympics next year. But the good thing is he's starting to build his profile. It's a good profile builder, and if he does well in the Olympics, if they do go ahead, he actually has got a head start now on sort of building his name and reputation more broadly across boxing. But also, if they're going to try build him into the next big star in Australian boxing, which is what they're trying to do, the Olympics is a good place to really boost his stocks as well. Okay, I just lost my place, so I'm just going to pick up from the top of the chat. Pacer says it's 22:52 in the Netherlands, so I'm a few minutes behind on the chat, so apologies for that, but we've got 88 in the building, so smash that like button if you can. That would be much appreciated. So we've been going for an hour and 11 minutes or so. We'll maybe go for another sort of 15-20 minutes, wrap up at about morning, noon or night. I do thank you for joining another live stream here. We've been talking all manner of topics through the live stream. Alan versus Christopher Lovejoy seemingly is going ahead. It's one of these cases, almost need to see Lovejoy stepping into the ring to really believe it. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that one. But also, Anthony asking, what is Deontay Wilder in his lab creating some sort of master plan for Tyson Fury, and it's just something we don't know about? I mean, it's hard to say. Tony Yoka may be facing Peter Milas. That has been called by the EBU for the European Union title. A number of things have been happening this week, so interested to get your take, your questions, your comments. So do drop them now. I am responding in the chat, so it's sort of your time. I've sort of covered off everything in my list. Says I might have dropped some frames in the last 2 minutes off. It has been slightly choppy. I do apologize for that. Wins. Is that a real question? Unger says Frank needs to step up. Howard is a walk in the park. Oh, for Frank St. Howard, Brian Howard on November the 7th. This is on the same card that Luis Ortiz is on as well. Sanchez and Ortiz effectively and stay busy. So it would have been much better if it was Ortiz versus Sanchez. And for both of them, maybe that's that crossroad fight that they need. We never get most of these fights we would like when we want them. So that's not a great card, as some of those fights aren't the greatest. Maybe the most competitive fight is going to be the third heavyweight fight on that bill, which is Michael Polite Coffey versus Joey Abel. Could really be a lot of, could be some fireworks in that one. So Walter White says he was downloading all the information during the first 6 rounds. Is this about the Loma and Lopez one? I guess my take on that is generally what we hear is he downloads for a round or two, but for 6 rounds, I mean, that was too much. And if we can't really say that it was just all downloading, because he was getting outworked, outboxed. And if you're not throwing punches and you're giving up rounds, you're making it hard for yourself. Sure, he came on later in the fight, but wasn't enough. And obviously Lopez finished strong too. So I didn't have any issue with the actual cards and the winner on the night. I mean, I had issue with the scorecards being so wide, because I thought it was a much closer fight, like a 7-5 type of fight. But in terms of the winner, I didn't have any issue with that. That's what I was trying to get at. AZ says Lovejoy will eat Dave Allen. Well, we shall see. Will says it's possible. Okay, I'm not really. I mean, the whole Loma Lopez stuff, I'm not really wanting to get into it too much because this is a heavyweight channel. And that fight was a week ago. So there's been, post-mortems on that ad nauseum. It was a good fight. Would I watch it again? Yeah. But do we need to see it again? So I guess that's another question. Wardley should fight a Nick Webb or Sokolowski, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of, because he's got the English title. Nick Webb, somewhere there or thereabouts. Webb sort of worked his way back after getting KO'd by Dave Allen. But yeah, that's not, I mean, Wardley is in that sort of position where he just needs to flesh out his resume a little bit. Going to fight him in the sort of position that he's at, that it's at a higher level, because he's sort of under that sort of 10 fight mark. You just need to sort of flesh it out a little bit. And Filip Hrgović has sort of stumbled into that sort of, he wants to call out and fight bigger names, but the risk and reward, but also, the optics of fighting a guy who might be 9-0 or 10-0, it just sort of does factor into to some extent. Liam says Leopai calling up Brown for the heavyweight pensioners title. I can't actually. I mean, at this point, that may actually be a pretty competitive fight. Nathan says never seen Lovejoy fight at all. And that's the thing, no one has, unless you were in one of those bars in Tijuana that he's been fighting. Footage hasn't come out. Someone must have been recording some footage, at least on a phone. Jay Billow says, I really enjoy your live streams, fluid discussion with great topics. Big up to the chat for that. I appreciate the feedback, and yeah, the chat is really active, and yeah, I do appreciate one and all for sort of debating the issues and not making, I mean, sometimes some people will make it a bit too personal and get up in their feelings about that, but I mean, we can all have opinions. We don't have to agree with each other, but it's, it's the debating of the issues. It's that, sort of discussion that, I really enjoy sort of seeing in there too. So good comment there, Jay Billow. Adam says Wardley versus Braid would be an okay next fight. Yep. Justice Huni looks very impressive debut. Like I was saying earlier, haven't seen it. Saw the result. I was trying to desperately find a way to watch that on Thursday night. After a couple of hours of trying to find some way to watch it, and my VPN was beaten, I had to give up. Lubak says the live streams are always quality with Squared. Thank you very much for that. Jared says Allen could win this one. Yeah, he totally could. If Lovejoy blows his wad, remembering he's over 300 pounds, never been past a couple of rounds, totally could see Dave Allen winning that one if he gasses and Allen starts to, really smash him. Pacer says, yes, you can have an opinion without getting blocked. Some of the other channels. Pacer says, yes, you can have an opinion without getting blocked. Some of the other channels suck. Well, I can't comment for what other channels do. I mean, as long as people are respectful in the way that, because we all have different ideas and, come from different walks of life that, shape our opinions and the way that we see the world. I mean, as long as people can put it across in a certain way and, not be, getting so upset that people disagree with them. We can all just have an opinion and, sort of throw it into the melting pot. And after all, this is just a boxing discussion. It's not the end of the world. It's not something that's, our lives are going to sort of, fall or rise on. It's just good discussion, good banter, for the sport that we all love. And this is one of the reasons I like doing the live streams too, because I like to get through my sort of topic list stuff that's been on my mind. But yeah, I like to have a good session in terms of going to the comments and be able to sort of go through them, because often there is some great ideas, great discussion that happens. So I do thank you one and all for contributing to that. So Lubak says Sanchez needs a Brazil or Hammer next. Yeah, he's at that point where he's sort of 15-0, 16-0, where he needs that sort of, someone that's in the sort of top 30-ish, somewhere there or thereabouts. Maybe Brazil's closer to top 40. I mean, I'm not sold on Brazil anymore. I think he's done. I think his durability is, but he's still got name recognition. He did fight for a title. He has been in some wars. I think those sorts of opponents, Brazil, Hammer, yeah, that's in about the level that he could get or should be, aiming for. But it's those sorts of guys that are often, in terms of their market value, they get paid a premium because they know what their market value is and that certain fighters need them. Bruce says PBC's looking to sign Ortiz versus Ruiz. That's one worth watching. I was really hoping that they wouldn't have, because Ruiz had talked about needing a tune-up, etc. But my question is, when's that going to happen? Because Ruiz is still going to have, his fight, whatever the fight's going to be, ahead of facing a Luis Ortiz. So by the time that fight could happen, we're probably talking at least mid-2021. So it is going to be probably a case of hurry up and wait. But Ruiz did say publicly that there's still options being considered for his next opponent, even though we're on the brink. This is sort of weeks ago of it being announced of Chris Arreola versus Andy Ruiz Jr. And I do wonder, because the heavyweights in the PBC stable, comparatively at least to some of the other guys, so if you think of the PBC heavyweight stable, you've got some names at the top, but then you have a number of guys, that filler role, like a Charles Martin, Gerald Washington, Adam Kovnatsky, Chris Arreola, and there's others too. They're comparatively, compared to other fighters in lower weight classes, they're expensive in the, you've got to add them to a card, and they have certain expectations. They get paid more in general. So I'm wondering with some of the sort of Fox, they've cut some of their shoulder programming. Maybe the budgets are a bit smaller for some of these cards, because I can't imagine that Ortiz and Frank Sanchez are getting paid big bucks for some of the opponents that they're facing, and their opponents will be getting paid nowhere near as some of these other heavyweights. So I wonder if there is a case of they're trying to push some of this out to 2021 for some of these guys who you'd hope to see fighting, but money could be behind it. And remembering, money is ever present in the sport in terms of all sorts of aspects of it. And because of the pandemic, no crowds, and obviously sponsorship is down. It's got to be tough for some of these broadcasters as well, because they don't want to pour big bucks into cards where they know that they're just taking a bath and, massive financial loss. So Swiss says he rates Parker as the best chin at heavyweight. I mean, there's certainly a debate for guys who have really good chins. Parker is one of them. Ruiz is another. Obviously, we know that Dave Allen's got a chin too. Nathan says Martin versus Varlene would be a good fight. Yep, I wouldn't mind seeing that. Will says squared. My comment was about Usyk. I said it's possible Loma's loss could affect Usyk, as Loma and Usyk seem to be really good friends. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe there could be some sort of flow-on effect. I'm not sure. Maybe it will question him, get himself questioning himself. I don't know. But I think in terms of, it's not a like-for-like comparison in terms of the opponents, because obviously Lopez is actually, from what we saw, can match it on a boxing standpoint in terms of his technical game, his defense, his speed. It's a completely different kettle of fish compared to Derek Chisora. So I see what you mean in your point, but maybe it's not quite like-for-like. I mean, if they were fighting on the same night, maybe it would, I'd read more into it, but yeah. Adam says Anderson is back end of November. Swiss says the chat is very well behaved tonight. It generally is, I think. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I'm sure this is all over YouTube. There are so many bot accounts, and I don't just mean people that are coming on and, under fake names or whatever, but ones that are directing, be my girlfriend or need lovely, all this sort of stuff. I mean, I must have blocked about 100 of those accounts that are just, bot accounts directing to some sort of, I don't know, to some sort of, nefarious content that then ultimately takes you off YouTube somewhere else. But I don't know how they do it, because there's been, they just seem to keep coming back and coming back. It's you probably have seen those sorts as well. Just sort of floating around. It seems to be something that I'm not sure how YouTube can deal with it, because clearly they're not real commenters. JPK World says, I want to see Ruiz versus Ortiz. Winner should replace Pulev as mandatory after the AJ fight. Well, that fight, Ruiz versus Ortiz, like I was saying, it may not happen for some time. AZ says Lovejoy is more competitive fight for Allen than Hammer. In terms of being, I think, more of a 50-50, yeah, certainly. I think Hammer was certainly the favourite in the other one. But maybe actually Allen goes in the favourite here, because there's so many unknowns about Lovejoy. But that's what makes it interesting to me. Pacer says his favourite is Nigel Ben. Swiss says blows his wad off Lovejoy. Well, he totally could. I mean, if he is, over 300 pounds, doesn't have great cardio, and it goes past 4 or 5 rounds. I mean, I guess that's the question about Alan Babbage too. How's he going to look later in fights, especially throwing a huge volume of punches early? Christopher Lovejoy is going to try and knock Dave Allen out if this fight happens. But if it, as we know, Allen's pretty hard to move. So he can take punishment, and if he can absorb something for a few rounds, he can certainly come back and dominate. So Nathan says Sanchez would beat Brazil. Yep, I think he would. Brazil was battered over rounds by AJ but iced by Wilder. Price's shotgun power. I still believe Price is a bigger puncher than AJ. Martin made the classic US mistake up at 10. Yeah, I mean, it did look like Martin didn't actually really want to be in there, but, it is what it is now. But, I mean, he's rehabilitated his image to some extent by showing a lot more grit in some fights since, like against Adam Kovnarski back in 2018. But, if he gets a title shot, if Pulev is injured, I'm sure he will see this as a redemption opportunity. I just hope that he's been training. I mean, that's the thing, because you don't want any, sort of excuses. And there was, I would say maybe 2 or 3 months ago, there was a series of posts over maybe 2 weeks from Martin and his team. It seemed to be a flurry of activity. He was back in camp, but then all of a sudden it went quiet. We don't know when he's fighting. Bruce says Areola should have stayed retired. He's going to get hurt. Too nice a guy for that. Well, it does sort of seem that he's hanging around for the paydays, and I think that style matchup against Kovnarski, and we knew it was going to end in fireworks. We knew it was going to mesh well. Sort of seems to have given him that confidence to believe that he can still do something in the heavyweight division. But I do think that, Areola close to 40. If for him at least, if he can manage to get a few paydays, well, good for him. But hopefully he's not going to end up getting too hurt or injured in a fight in a stretch too far, because Andy Ruiz Jr. is a different kettle of fish to Adam Kovnarski. I think the styles will mesh well to some extent, but Ruiz with his front foot counter-punching is probably going to piece Areola up. Swiss says Ogono was smashing him up, but then got exposed by his gas tank, and that was one of the that was in February 2017. That fight between Brazil and Ogono, that was one of my favourite fights of that year. It was just all action. Yeah, I mean, his gas tank was exposed to some extent, Ogono, and that was always a bit of an issue in his career. But it was also the case that just the defence, he was just too greedy. Got too greedy, just tried to, he could have, because the body work in the first couple of rounds, he was really hurting Brazil, but he just got greedy. He could have, taken it at a bit more of a sedate pace and just broken Brazil down, because he was doing that. Nathan says Johnny Fisher, another heavyweight making his debut in December. He is managed by Sam Jones, trained by Mark Tibbs. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing. There's been a lot of talk about Johnny Fisher. The Romford Bull is coming. I haven't seen him fight. Don't know how good he is, but we're soon going to see. Cash Cow says Boxing Squared. Hey buddy. Hey buddy to you too. Swiss says Ortiz versus Brazil. Well, I was hoping that for his next fight, or the next combination of fights, because there's about sort of 6 or 7 heavyweights at PBC you can match with each other, that we may see some of those in-house matches. And I wouldn't have minded necessarily Ortiz versus Brazil. You could maybe say for Brazil it was a crossroads fight, last chance saloon, and another chance for Ortiz to prove that he's still got something in the gas tank. But then we end up having the same level sort of fights that it's stay busies for Luis Ortiz. And Frank Sanchez also stay busy on that November 7th card. So Bruce says, just subbed, good live salute. Thank you for that, Bruce. Appreciate that. Deviant Video says, if Wilder needs a tune-up, maybe he could fight KSI. He'd probably put KSI into a grave. Unfortunately for KSI, that's, yeah. Adam says, does anyone think we see Brazil back? I think we will. I think he's still the thing is with Brazil, and this is like some other fighters, they still believe that they're at a certain level. And, as we know, a lot of heavyweights have levels of delusion, and they think of themselves in the division in a certain place in it. Like, Brazil still believes that he is one of the top fighters in the heavyweight division, even though most of us would say that he is nowhere near that, and that he's seen better days, and that, the guy's seemingly his durability is starting to, desert him now. But I still think that Dominic Brazil will come back, but it'll be for the right money. He will be trying to sell his name and reputation for a certain level of paycheck. Will says, it's so hard to call with Lovejoy because on one hand he could be an absolute donkey, and on the other hand he could actually be decent. Lovejoy weighed 236 pounds in his last fight, 100 pounds more now. I think the 236 pounds, just bear with me, I've just got a cough. I think the 236 pounds was probably inaccurate. He's weighed between the 250s and somewhere around 317 or something like that, sort of fluctuated between that. I don't believe he was 236. Just based on having followed his social media, he's never got down that low and looked that trim. I think that is an error. But he's saying on a social media somewhere around 350 pounds, hoping to be around 335 for the fight. If it really is that much, 330 or thereabouts, that is good for Dave Allen. So Unga says, Brazil says he wants to be back, but he can't get a medical clearance. He might have to fight in the Midwest to get licensed. Yeah, I'm sure that he'll come back somewhere and he'll be fighting. The Hearns run the BBOC says, is Dave Allen a bum? Well, in the context of he's not a world beater, I don't think, calling him a bum is fair. He may be limited, but he's got his place. I mean, I think he's somewhere between English and British level. But in the context of other heavyweights in terms of profile, I mean, Dave Allen's profile way outstrips what his record, what he's achieved in the sport. And certainly what he's earned to the level of wins that he's got. I mean, he's done really well for himself. He's found a sort of niche. He's exploited it. He obviously thinks he can do something in the sport. And this is where the Christian Hammer fight was a good litmus test for him, because I think he was going to get beaten by Hammer. I think Hammer is obviously a solid sort of European level. He's maybe a top 30-ish guy, somewhere there or thereabouts. He's a good litmus test, one of those guys that people want to sort of have ahead of a fighter against a top 10 or, somewhere there or thereabouts. I think Dave Allen would have got beaten, but I think the Lovejoy fight is much more competitive. But I think calling him a bum is probably a bit unfair. I mean, I don't like when sort of fighters are sort of called that. I mean, I know sometimes we, especially really low tier opposition, we maybe joke and call them cans or, street sweepers, that sort of stuff. But yeah, anyway, Bill Billy says Price can bang. He has a big right hand. He had Povetkin in serious trouble. And I guess Price is one of those sort of careers that, what could have been. But obviously the chin just couldn't handle it in certain instances. And as Angus says, as Price has proven time and time again, there's a lot more to heavyweight than big power. So Nathan says, what kind of opponent do you think Hughie Fury will face on November 21st? I'm not expecting too much, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, it's the 24th of October, and it may be the 23rd of October in some places where you are in the chat. At less than a month's notice, I wouldn't be expecting too much. Swiss says, I'm so sad about Ogono. He was my favourite boxer. He just had all except the gas tank and chin. He got greedy. Yeah, well, apparently he's coming back to MMA or kickboxing or something like that, but I don't follow that, so I've sort of lost track of him. I'm still following him on Instagram, but yeah, he's not coming back to the heavyweight division. Liam says, put the two Cubans together, Sanchez versus Ortiz. I'd like to see that fight. It's a good crossroads fight for both of them. But maybe the money's not there that they both want to sort of have for a fight with that much risk. And that's the problem. Woker Sam says, Lovejoy, he sounds like a porn actor. I guess it is sort of one of those names. Swiss says, legend has it Brazil's soul is still trying to find its way back to his body. Could be, could be. So Intangible says hello to you too. Nathan says Sanchez's ceiling might not be too high. Hard to say though. He can box, he has good speed, his power may be a problem as he jumps up to the levels, but he is decent. Yeah, I mean, I sort of look at Sanchez and sort of think there's a lot to like. And maybe at a certain level the power, and that's with a lot of guys, you know, they rise up the ranks and it's hard for them to get those one-punch knockouts, or even sort of break guys down to the point where they can take them out. I think he can be in some good fights, but I think there's a number of those sort of similar guys that, maybe Sanchez has got a bit more power than Caballero, but there's guys like Caballero, Joseph Parker, that their sort of route to a title was certainly a points decision off the back of their boxing skills, and I certainly think Sanchez sort of falls into that same sort of category. Pacer says, some say that Pulev is an easy fight for Joshua, but I think he's a tricky customer. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, been thinking in two different ways on this. I mean, I know Joshua has been talking about wanting to walk through him, and you can sort of look at that and go, is there some crumbs and some just markers that you go, is that really the sort of attitude he should be taking or looking? Is he looking through him? Sort of the same way that he was looking through Andy Ruiz Jr. But Pulev, he hasn't looked great in some of his recent fights, but in some ways, and there was the Rydell Booker fight, and I said this at the time, I sort of thought that he was like holding back. He was boxing within himself. He looked like he was trying to box for the rounds, and he looked like he could have taken Booker out, and especially, to the body, he was avoiding it, even though every time he hit him to the body, he was hurting him. So, yeah, I think Joshua should win, but it maybe not be as, standard as some people think. I know that some people think he's just going to roll through in 1 or 2 rounds. I'd be surprised if that happened. But, what's Pulev got left? What's this version of Pulev got left? That's the question. Marcus says, do you know why the Kosabutsky fight got cancelled? No. I mean, I was looking on the Universum website because Universum Box Promotions was running that card. There was going to be a number of heavyweights on that card. Kim Lundqvist was there. Christian Thun was going to be on that card too. It just got cancelled about 3 days before. So I don't know if it had to do with COVID. I don't know if it had to do with TV and money. It's just hard to say. All of a sudden it was cancelled, and because that was going to be pretty much the only decent card with any heavyweight boxing last weekend. So I was a bit gutted it got cancelled. One, because I was really looking forward to seeing Zan Kosabutsky back in the ring, because he's a guy that I do rate, and I think if he can be moved along in the right way, he can be in some good fights. He is a well under the radar prospect at this point. Hugh Campbell says, hey mate, did you watch the Justice Huni Pro debut and what did you think? No, I was unable to actually access it. I couldn't, my VPN was beaten by anything that I was trying, so I wasn't able to watch it on the night. So I have been sent a link. There's been a couple of people posting a link in the chat as well to some highlights and to hopefully the full fight. So I'm intending to watch that in the next day and hopefully do some sort of follow-up video, because I like Justice Huni. I like what they're doing with him. Very ambitious, and I think he is one of these next wave of prospects that we're all going to be talking about for a number of years. If Allen gets one of his liver shots in, Lovejoy's toast. And I could totally see that happening. It could be a case where Lovejoy for the first 2 rounds is coming forward, putting it on him. And from what Johnny Rice tells me, because he sparred with Christopher Lovejoy a number of times, that Lovejoy has actually got some skill. He's actually decent. So I could see him maybe sort of similar to Lucas Brown, because Lucas Brown was outboxing Dave Allen. Maybe it'll be a case of Lovejoy is putting it on Dave Allen, trying to take him out. And bear in mind, this is if this fight happens, right? If the fight happens. It's a big if at this point. So if it does, I could see that the first couple of rounds could play out similar to the Allen fight, and then all of a sudden, as Lovejoy starts to tire, because if he's over 300 pounds, he's going to have a gas tank that's going to diminish very quickly. It'll empty, and I think as soon as he starts to slow down, the volume slow downs, Allen becomes into the fight a bit more. And we do know he's got some good shots that he likes to throw in. The overhand right, which he starts Nick Webb with. And also he has that liver shot, which he did to Lucas Brown and Samir Nebo. So I could totally see one of those 2 punches being his money punches that he could stop Christopher Lovejoy. It's not going to go the distance, that fight. And if Lovejoy says he can knock Allen out. So we will see. Apparently he hits hard, but because we haven't seen him, who knows? Who really knows? Lubuck says Allen was clearly hurt against Price, and I mean long-term damage. Well, and that's the other question that you have. I mean, we all talk about Dave Allen as being this durable guy, but he's been in a lot of wars. He's taken a lot of punishment by a lot of fighters. It starts to, add up. And I mean, I sort of just was mentioning before, I think Dominic Breazeale, he was once sort of one of those guys that was sort of, seen as an iron chin and, a guy who could take a lot of punishment, and it was a badge of honor. But his durability, I think it's deserting him now. And it could be a case now with Dave Allen. Is there diminishing returns? And remember, Dave Allen's been whipping himself into good shape, so he's dropped down a bit of bulk. I mean, is he going to be a bit more human? I mean, it's a question. So Nathan says Babbage is similar to Allen in the way that they will build him as a card filler. He seems to have a bit of a cult following now, but he is exciting to watch. Yeah, the whole Babbage thing, and to me it's still some sort of gimmick. Yeah, you've got to. I mean, if he's the real deal, we've got to see him in some much tougher, higher level fights. But for a guy who's got about 5 fights, on his resume, it is what it is for this point. And I think, for whoever he fights and the style that he brings, he is a card filler at this point. But it's going to be entertaining for however long it lasts. But there is sort of the, if the whole Dave Allen thing is starting to be all played out, they need to be building some of these other guys to have some interest. And I think the way that they've been working Babbage, he sort of seems to be the heir apparent, at least in terms of the interesting card filler. So the Flying Pan Man says Allen could build himself up fighting older European guys like Dorper. Well, I guess if he fights, apologies just for a sec. I guess if he fights Christopher Lovejoy, if this one goes ahead and he wins and he looks good, people will be talking about Dave Allen again. They'll be saying, can he do it the right way? Yada, yada, yada. Because I was thinking of his statement saying he wants to maximize his talent. I was thinking he'd start at a slightly lower level and build up, go through some levels, and let's see where he really is at. But, then he walked straight into a Christian Hammer fight, which I was expecting he would have lost. But, if he can beat Lovejoy, and who knows how good Lovejoy is, and even if he beats Lovejoy and we're like, well, what was that? It's hard to see if they would put him in, some of these guys. Some of it depends on money too, because the only way that they can afford to have Dave Allen versus Johan Dorp or, Christian Hammer is if it's on the undercard of a pay-per-view bill, because if it's just a normal fight night, there's not the money available. You'd be dropping down to more that Sinir Nebo and Senad Gashi type level. Will Stokes says, how'd you call Makhmudov versus Yoka squared? I personally rate them as two of the best prospects at heavyweight. Yeah, well, there's 6 prospects that I've been sort of touting as my sort of what I consider the best heavyweight prospects for the past couple of years, and those are 2 of them. I mean, I think similar to Yoka versus Allen, Yoka would be boxing rings around Makhmudov, but Makhmudov is, because he is a very aggressive fighter, shall we say it, that's probably maybe a tame way to put it, but if he starts to land on Yoka, and if Yoka starts to become hittable, all bets are off. But it's one of these sort of situations, someone who can box and move, and it's got enough pop on their punches to keep Makhmudov honest. It's, that he can be outboxed, and he can. I don't see someone like Yoka stopping Makhmudov, but I could see Makhmudov stopping Yoka. But I would lean towards a Yoka points win, but I wouldn't be shocked if Makhmudov caught him with something, because every punch that he throws is with bad intention, and he'd just keep coming. He'd keep coming. I mean, how mentally draining that would be. I mean, we've seen Yoka in with guys like Demetrenko, Mikhail Wallish, all that sort of stuff. Those guys came to fall down after they, made it look good for 3 or 4 rounds, but they knew what their role was. Someone like Makhmudov wouldn't be doing that. I mean, what do we make of the recent Johan Dorper and Tony Yoka fight? I mean, I saw that Johan Dorper was saying, that the referee called it off early and all that sort of stuff, and he was able to recover and blah, blah, blah. But, to me, that was a different version of Dorper. It wasn't the one that we thought was going to turn up, because the version of Dorper from, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago that could take that sort of punishment and keep coming forward, even against Miller in 2017, that wasn't what we saw turn up against Yoka. So, yeah, I mean, credit to Yoka for the win and the way that he got that win. But, yeah, there's still questions about Yoka for me, and I need to see that chin check. I mean, that's one of the open questions with some of these heavyweights. They've all had it their own way. No one's put it back on them. So this is one of the reasons I'm looking to see Joyce versus Dubois. What can Joyce do to put Dubois under pressure? But, yeah, I don't see Makhmudov and Yoka getting made anytime soon, but I would love to see that fight. Dave Allen's last brain cell says that Lovejoy is getting the big right. I'm training 3 times a week for an hour each time. I think he's been training even more than that. Allen has been looking in pretty much career best shape. Lou Buck says Huey Fury versus Tom Schwartz, and I'm glad that you raised Tom Schwartz. This was something I was intending to do a video. The WBO rankings came out, but it's sort of, they came out for whatever reason, they've seemed to have fallen behind, a month behind in publishing their rankings. So their rankings for September, they only just came out. But there were 2 interesting things. One, Ajit Kabiel came into the rankings at 15 or whatever it was, but Tom Schwartz is out. And people will be saying, okay, well, that's good. He's, hasn't been doing anything. But what was interesting to me, at least, about that is Tom Schwartz has been ranked consecutively for 4 years in the WBO. So for the first time since 2016, he's not in their rankings. And to me, that was interesting. But because I was super busy with work, I wasn't able to get around to, because I actually did all the work, all the prep for a heavyweight news mashup video midweek, and I just couldn't get past the first 2 minutes, and I ended up flagging and be like, no, I need to go to bed. So apologies that the content dried up this week. It's just been a very busy time work-wise, but I'm back, and there's going to be some videos coming this weekend. I need to get some coverage out ahead of next week with the Allen and Lovejoy. Apparently that's happening. That's the thing. Also, Alexander Usyk versus Derek Chisora. So it's not going to be like a 10 things to watch for video, but it'll be similar to that. There's just a few things with that. There's open questions for me, at least, about Alexander Usyk. But also, if he passes the test, what does that mean? What can we actually expect? I mean, there's some interesting storylines there. So Jay Billows says, what's up, Dave Allen's last brain cell? Fury beats Wilder and AJ, but I reckon Wilder can give AJ problems. It's just a shame that we never saw that, that fight when we could have seen it, because I don't think it happens now. Bill Billy says, who do you want to see on the Parker vs. Farr card? Could be fun seeing Hemi Hill or David Light. Given it's a Duco card, and they're controlling the budget for it. I mean, it's promoted, as it were, by, Eddie Hearn and Lou DiBella, but for all intents and purposes, it is a Duco card. They're the ones putting the event on. And in line with Duco cards, they're generally a bit thin in terms of what's on the undercard. And with this being a pay-per-view, they're probably, and remembering David Higgins' company, the events company that's putting this on, Duco Events, they need this. David Higgins has really been pushing for this fight to happen. This is happening outside of Parker's DAZN deal. And part of the reason it would be happening in New Zealand too is because it's going to put some money into David Higgins' business. So they all need this. And I would expect that it's going to be a relatively cheap undercard. They're going to sell it on the main event pretty much exclusively. And I don't think we should expect much. And there's probably going to be the same old sort of, there'll be a couple of corporate fights. At some point, the announcer is going to sort of embarrassingly say that some sort of New Zealand tradition or something like that. Lubak says that Pulev has looked on the slide in recent years, lacks the power to do a Ruiz through, though his jab will be a problem. Pacer says, is Babbage a good prospect or just another big mouth? I would go with the latter. Someone, actually, it was one of my regular subscribers, G-Man, actually recently asked me about would I like to see Makhmudov versus Babbage. And Aslanbek Makhmudov absolutely dog walks Alan Babbage. Bruce Goes says, Kevin Johnson would be a great stepping stone to gauge those new lions. Well, some of them have already fought Kevin Johnson, like Philip Hrgovic fought Kevin Johnson in 2018. It's almost to the point now, the credit you can get for a Kevin Johnson win has got to the point where it's almost not worth having fought him. I mean, it's sort of coming to the point where there's some of those guys that were those top 25, top 30 guys for years, like a Marius Vuk or a Johan Dorper. They're the sort of new Kevin Johnson types. And if they continue in the sport, that's where they're going. Angus says Hemi and John Parker will both be on that card too. Well, I'm hoping if it is Hemi Ahil, if he is going to be on that card, that he fights someone of note, because his career needs a bit of a shot in the arm. Woka Sam says Lovejoy could be a fake boxer. Totally could be. Might be a guy who can punch, but that's it. Nathan says, if Allen wins, he'll call out someone. If he loses, I could see him facing Babbage, though. Well, if he wins, I guess there is something to be said that they could build up that rivalry in terms of him facing Babbage. And to be honest, if Dave Allen, if his durability holds up and, he's not declining, I think for Alan Babbage is going to have a tough time getting him out of there. And if Babbage, is beating him up for 3 or 4 rounds, all of a sudden, he could be out of gas, and this is what could happen in a Lovejoy fight too. I mean, it's almost like that sort of Homer Simpson strategy when he was facing Drederick Tatum and all those other guys in that episode from the 90s, where it was kind of like, just let them sort of, punch themselves out, and then all of a sudden you throw a few punches and they're done. Billy says, Babbage is a live dog, tough customer. Try and look at his amateur fights, especially the one versus Christian Dimitrov. Beast, more experience than his record shows. But I think, though, for the heavyweight division and to truly be competitive, he really should be at cruiserweight. If he was going for a title and his aspirations were of a certain level, he'd be at cruiserweight. But I think he wants to make some money. He wants to make the most of his time in the sport. He's got a gimmick and he's working it. It's been picked up, and I kind of think that it's going to backfire at some point. I don't think that he's going to be able to fight above a certain level. So CJ James says that Babbage is an animal, he believes. Yeah, I mean, I can see him fighting at a certain level. I can't see him being a guy that's going to trouble anyone at the top. I think if him and Philip Hrgovic fought right now, Hrgovic knocks him out. Just my thoughts on that one. Maybe an unpopular opinion with some who are starting to get into the sort of Babbage myth and lore and legend, but yeah. I mean, I think Babbage ultimately is too small. I don't think he's a good enough boxer to trouble some of the guys at the top. And I don't know if the power is really as legit as some people are making out to be. So Dave Allen's last brain cell says, after he beats Lovejoy, I want to fight a white rhino. I want a big stick with a nail. But I told Eddie I'll do it for a new flat in Donny. Interesting. Adam says John Parker versus maybe a Lance Bryant and some other up-and-comers. Nathan says, be interesting to see who Fabio Wardley fights next. Yeah, hopefully he's out before the end of the year. That would be good. The Hearns run the BBB OC says Christopher Lovejoy is ranked 405th in the world, yet 15 in the WBA rankings. Any explanation to that, mate? Well, that's just a case of he clearly knows someone or either has something over someone to get in there. He's now been ranked on 3 separate occasions by the WBA. For what purpose? It's a question. I mean, earlier this year, when he was ranked again, he said that he was going to be facing Trevor Bryan and that he would be reinserted into the WBA rankings. He was reinserted, and the fight never happened. He's still there because he was put in at number 14. Now he slipped back to number 15. Who knows, what connections he's working here that are getting him in here, because it's not on merit. He's faced one guy with a winning record. He's had 2 fights in the past, or since the start of 2019, and they're both against, low-tier opposition. There is nothing to say that Christopher Lovejoy has done anything of merit to work his way into the WBA rankings, let alone once, but 3 times it's happened now. So it's, it's the WBA. It's trying to explain the unexplainable sometimes. So Jay Billow says, are we talking about a decline in Dave Allen's chin? A 28-year-old something man who should have been approaching his prime. Horrible management by Hearn. Well, to some extent, I mean, Dave Allen has been his own sort of worst enemy too, because he's accepted these short notice fights. He's been willing to take these paychecks and against guys that really we knew he was overmatched against. But, you know, obviously there's been a portion of his career where he's been matched at the right level. He's looked okay, got some okay wins, an upset win against Nick Webb, but then it all came sort of crumbling down. But, yeah, he says he's taking it seriously, but I know some people are sort of saying Dave Allen will now be a different man because he's been training and he was in the Usyk camp, but we just got to keep expectations in check. But if his chin is on the decline, and that's, you know, an if, because remember all the punishment that he's taken, who knows what could happen in, you know, upcoming fights, because if his durability deserts him, he's a much more, obviously, a beatable fighter. Caesar says Dave beats Lovejoy, KO, screenshot it. Well, I could totally see that happening. I don't think that's an outrageous thing to say, and it could be a case of he takes some of Lovejoy's best and then takes over the fight. Could totally see that happening. Sort of third, fourth round stoppage, something like that. I don't think this one goes past 6 rounds. I don't think Lovejoy's got the gas tank. He's going to go for broke, try to take Dave Allen out. But if Dave Allen, you know, is, you know, taking lots of shots and can't defend himself, maybe Lovejoy will get one of those sort of stoppages where Allen is on his feet. He can't respond. I don't know. I mean, we're certainly going to... It's really interesting for a lot of reasons. I don't care about Allen, but I would watch that fight just for Lovejoy, says AZ. And I think a lot of people are sort of interested in this fight to the extent that they are, because you've got this guy who's been sort of touting himself for years now on social media, and we have nothing really to back up and no idea how good he really is. Donald says, is it true they're talking about matching Fury with Takam for December? I think this is at the point in Takam's career it would be a terrible fight. Yes, they are. That was one of the two names that Bob Arum has sort of said are sort of front runners right now. The other is Ajit Cabello. I talked about this earlier in the stream. Yeah, I'm not interested in that. I think at this point it is a terrible fight. Carlos Takam has clearly been on the decline, and since a knockout loss to Derek Chisora in the end of 2018 or near the end of 2018, he really has fought pretty much nondescript opposition. So on merit, I don't think he would deserve a title shot, and he wouldn't. It wouldn't be a good fight. It would, as you say, would be a terrible fight. Carlos Takam and his management, Star Boxing, which co-promotes him, been talking about that he's ready and willing to take on for a title shot, all that sort of stuff. And to me, that's always felt super optimistic based on what he's been doing, who he's been fighting, and how bad he's looked in some fights. But, you know, if he's Johnny on the spot, well, I guess good for him, but I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that at all. I think that's a terrible fight. I'd much prefer, as I mentioned earlier, to see the fresh fight against a guy that's still in his prime, undefeated, in Ajit Cabello, who is actually a tricky customer, is a good boxer, but I would expect Fury to win that one. Nathan says, I wouldn't be shocked to see Berman Stavern out again for one of these top prospects. Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, he's already been fed to a guy like Joe Joyce, so clearly if the money's right, they're going to put Stavern out there. There's a number of these guys now that are sort of over 40 years old that are sort of, putting themselves out for these sorts of fights. Obviously, Lucas Brown as well. He's was going to be facing Otto Wallin, and then it was going to be Abdi Dovtaev and all that sort of stuff. So, if the money's right, they'll jump in there. Billy says that he read... Oh, sorry, he says, to be honest, I don't really care to see Tyson Fury fight anymore. I find him boring, and his personality has become annoyingly cocky. I'm ready for Dillian White to get a shot against him. Dillian is an exciting heavyweight. Well, I guess Dillian White, his career is hinging on November 21st to some extent, or at least the what next. Will Magic Man says boxing is basically dogfighting in human form. It's only the money that matters. Shame on us all. Lol. So Connor says, do you think we'll see Deontay Wilder fight for the new WBC Super Cruiserweight title when it starts supposedly next month? Possibly. Yeah. I mean, they will want to start that division, whatever, whenever it starts and however it's going to be run, all that sort of stuff, with a bang. So if Deontay Wilder is not fighting Tyson Fury, they could well make Deontay Wilder, verse whoever the next in line is in whatever new rankings that they're going to come up with. And if they do, it's probably going to be a winnable fight for Deontay Wilder. Yeah, I don't want to see that new division. I'm not really interested. Allen wouldn't be able to withstand the onslaught from Babbage if that fight happens. I love Allen as much as the next guy, but he's too slow. He's too hittable to avoid a stoppage against Babbage. Yeah, I mean, does Babbage have the power to really stop Dave Allen, though? Because if Babbage goes 3 or 4 rounds, is gassed, Allen could be in that fight, just like potentially in the Lovejoy fight. Nathan says too many pay-per-views in boxing, and in a pandemic, most of out of work at the moment. The Usyk card looks weak. The White Povetkin 2 card looks a lot better. Yeah, there seems to be, I mean, in the run-up to Christmas, there's pay-per-views across the board. I mean, not just at heavyweight too, but, you know, obviously there's Errol Spence returning. There's other pay-per-view events too. So it's such an expensive fight. And obviously there's another one for Joseph Parker. That's in New Zealand. So apparently that's going to be on DAZN elsewhere. But for New Zealanders, if you get in early, it's $39. And then I think it goes up to $49. And then the day or two before the fight, $60. So if you're in the UK, you'd halve that amount. So it's roughly £20 for me to watch Joseph Parker versus Junior Fa. A fight that's probably a little bit undercooked. And yeah, I mean, I would have preferred to have, I mean, I'm not going to go into it again because I've sort of spoken about it ad nauseum. But yeah, I mean, it's someone just saying it's not a 50-50. No, it's not. It's more like a 70-30 to Joseph Parker, in my view. Nathan says, problem is most of these fighters won't fight off pay-per-view, but the product has been watered down for years. Yeah, I mean, and that's the case. It seems to be getting further watered down. So, you know, sometimes you're lucky if you get a decent main event. I mean, and sometimes it's a subpar main event, but because the fighter has got a big name, the A side, you know, that's why it's on pay-per-view, because they have to get paid. Nathan says, Huni looks like a real talent, very fast hands, sharp jab, a switch hitter, one to watch anyway. Well, I will be watching, I got to catch up with that fight, so I'll probably put something up on the channel. Billy says, Babbage probably better suited for cruiser, especially with the new weight class created by Bellew and the WBC. Well, actually, that might be right in his wheelhouse, and in terms of competing for a title, I think he's got a better chance in that sort of under 224 pound division at least. The Flying Pan Man says, be interesting to see if Farr picks up fights in the UK if he loses to Parker. Farr versus Price or Allen or Gorman. Well, it sort of depends on his promoter. His promoter, Lou DiBella, is based in the US, and Farr has had fights in the US. But, yeah, I mean, he's with him on a long-term deal, so I would sort of suspect he'd more be fighting in the US rather than the UK. But I guess money talks. Caesar says Takam would be utterly pointless. Tough old hound, but not top level by any means. Yeah, I mean, that's the way I feel about it at the moment. I mean, he'd put up a good showing in terms of he wouldn't embarrass himself, but he wouldn't be in the fight to win it. That's the thing. Nathan says Zhang versus Takam would be a good fight. Yeah, I mean, I think that's more at the level that, I mean, and that's more of the case that Takam is the B-side. Zhili Zhang is the guy that needs that fight to progress his career, where Takam is on the downslide. RJ number 1 says, Junior Farr is a dangerous heavyweight opponent for 85% of heavyweights with power and height. Parker needs to be up and about or could possibly lose and derail his career. Well, if Joseph Parker loses on, you know, because it would be by points, that's how it would be a major shock, and certainly his career would take a massive hit. But the way that I'm sort of picturing that fight sort of playing out is it's more competitive early on than people expect. Farr probably actually, you know, while both are taking a look at each other, Farr, who's got the long reach, probably working behind the jab, picking up some early rounds. Then it starts to, as maybe Farr tires towards the mid-rounds, Parker starts to come into it, starts to break him down, and then Parker starts taking over the fight. That's sort of the way that I see it, but you also have to remember Joseph Parker, in these fights where it's looking like it's going to go the distance, he does have this like energy saver mode that he goes into sort of round 6 to 9. So, but if he feels that Farr is there for the taking, he'll go for it. But it is one of these things that if he knows it's going to go 12, that he has to conserve himself, because he can't sort of keep up he tends to often a lot of fights sort of circle and sort of just, you know, pop out a jab, and sort of gets into this routine where he sort of is dropping rounds without really doing a lot. But it's not, maybe Far's not of that certain level that some of these other guys that he's faced where he's been in that situation. I mean, there's some interesting talking points, but certainly Parker is the favourite for a reason. So Joseph says, what's up, Boxing Squared? Well, it's Saturday morning, I was about to say Sunday morning, long weekend here in New Zealand, 98 in the building, so wherever you are, morning, noon or night, I do appreciate you joining the Boxing Squared live stream, another one which followed a period of about 5 days without a video or anything on the channel, so apologies for that. Was super busy with work and it was shattered at the end of each day, so I just didn't have enough in the tank to get up a video. So I guess we could say I was gassed and, was barely throwing a punch. But RJ says he's tipping Parker, though. Yeah, I would as well. Joseph says, I hope Wilder comes out of hiding. Love him or hate him, he was exciting and still takes part in some great fights. Yeah, I mean, for all the sort of back and forth with the different factions, he added a dimension to the heavyweight division. He was a character. If he is going to stay in the sport, I mean, it's one of the things as well. I mean, I've been saying for a couple of years now that I thought one of the biggest factors to Deontay Wilder continuing to fight at a high level for a sustained period was injuries. And a lot of people just like to dismiss that right off the bat, but I think we're seeing it playing out now. And perhaps he doesn't return to the sport. I don't know. He's got a lot of wear and tear, a lot of miles on the clock, over 40 fights, a lot of training camps. It's, it takes a lot out of you. There's very small margins at the top of the heavyweight division. D. Hodges says, what's up, Boxing Squared? Will Magic Man says, is Peter Fury still in quarantine? I haven't really sort of caught up with that, but that was because I think they've moved that fight that his fighter was in, Savannah Marshall, to the Usyk card, perhaps. Billy says, I'm out. Great boxing chat, fellas. Cheers. Thank you for joining us, Billy. So I'll wrap this up soon, another sort of 5 or 10 minutes. I think I said I was going to wrap it up at about half an hour ago, but, sometimes these things just really rip by and go through. So I thank you for all the contribution in the chat, but we'll go for another 5 minutes or so. So any final questions or comments, get them in now. 103 in the building, so if you can smash that like button, that would be much appreciated. So Gorgaruga, Peter Fury is out of quarantine and got retested. He tested negative this time. Thank you for that update to the question that was asked in the chat. Paul says Junior can move, but Joe has been in a number of hard fights. I suspect Far will move for 4 to 6 rounds, then Parker hits the gas. 65-35 Parker. Yeah, it's somewhere there or thereabouts. I mean, for me, it's roughly maybe a 70-30, 80-20 fight, somewhere around that. I mean, and part of that being so sort of slanted towards Parker is that Far just hasn't fought the same quality opposition. Sure, Joseph Parker hasn't won all of those fights where he's been in tough fights, but he was certainly in a lot of those tough fights where it was, it was hard, tough, and competitive. He was able to match it for the most part. We haven't seen, Far at the level that Parker's fought at, so we don't really know his resolve. We don't really know how good he is. I mean, this is why I sort of say that it's undercooked, that it needed 1 or 2 good wins for Junior Far to build this fight a bit more. I mean, they're marketing it here in New Zealand as the biggest fight of the century, but I don't even think it's it's probably maybe the 3rd biggest fight, perhaps. I mean, you've got David Tua versus Shane Cameron, but then you had Parker and Ruiz, and the way that Parker Ruiz build up sort of played out, it was just wall to wall coverage for several weeks ahead of that fight. It's just not the same for this one. They're going to build it up. They're going to whip up a bit of interest, but it's nowhere near the biggest fight of the century, as they keep, trying to say. So Eddie says Hemi on the Parker and Far undercard. Well, maybe we'll have to see. Damien says Fury versus Yoka. Did I miss something? Just landed on the chat. Do you mean Huey Fury versus Tony Yoka or someone else? Unga says Junior in excellent shape and will come in big, doing some great work at City Kickboxing. And that's one of the things, his preparations. We know that he's in a good gym. He's got a lot of, kickboxers and MMA fighters working out of that gym, including Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker, all that sort of stuff. So there's a number of guys in that gym that are going to be giving him some good work. So his preparation, I don't doubt, will be good. But can he beat Parker? That's the question. But just getting back to the chat here, Tua versus Cameron, loved the build-up. Yeah, and that was a build-up over years, 2 or 3 years. I mean, there was real... I mean, it was will they, won't they fight? When's it going to happen? There was a lot of animosity, and that helped build it. That helped get people believing that Shane Cameron had a chance too. Whereas, obviously, kind of like this to a little extent, David Tua had been there, done that. Shane Cameron to a lesser extent, although maybe he'd had tougher tests than Junior Fa has had at the same point. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's made now. We're going to get the fight. I just hope that they come in there, give it their best, and there's no excuses. At the end of the day, I mean. We just want to see put on their best display that they can. Anyway, it's 2 minutes and 9 into the stream, so I'm going to wrap it up here. So thank you again, one and all, for joining the Boxing Squared live stream for another time. So hopefully I'll try to get it out another live stream during the week. So starting to fade now. My water bottle's empty, so I'm starting to get a little bit hoarse on this end. But yeah, thank you again, and some coverage coming over the weekend ahead of the card next weekend. So we'll have some preview coverage. And if Alan and Lovejoy is happening, that's going to be an interesting little video to make, because obviously Christopher Lovejoy talks the big game. Is he going to show up, and are we going to see him in the ring? It's a big question. We'll see you later.